I am Kendra, 35 years old, and until a stormy Tuesday night, I kept a careful distance from the polished lies of my family. As a senior forensic wealth manager, I track hidden assets and dismantle financial fraud for a living, but nothing prepared me for the devastating secret my parents were hiding in their own home. At nearly midnight, my phone lit up with a FaceTime call from my 6-year-old niece, Zuri. She was whispering in pitch darkness, crying that she was starving, freezing, and locked in a room without power. I drove straight to my parents' estate and kicked the side door completely off its hinges. Just as I wrapped my shivering niece in my coat, the front door chimed. My parents and my golden child sister strolled in from a gala dripping in diamonds and laughing entirely unbothered that a child was suffering under their roof. What I did next shattered their pristine social empire forever. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to step up and protect an innocent child from toxic family members. The rain was coming down in relentless sheets over Charlotte, North Carolina that night. It was 11:45 p.m., and the thunder was loud enough to rattle the glass of my downtown penthouse windows. I was at my kitchen island reviewing a complex offshore tax portfolio when my personal cell phone buzzed. The caller ID showed an old email address I had set up for an iPad I gifted my late brother Jamal years ago. I answered immediately. The screen was completely black. I could only hear the sound of jagged, shaky breathing and the heavy drum of rain against a thin roof. Then a tiny voice pierced through the darkness. "Auntie Kendra." It was Zuri. Her voice was trembling so violently she could barely form the words. "I am so cold, Auntie. My stomach hurts really bad. The power is off in my room and I cannot open the door." My blood turned to absolute ice. Zuri was supposed to be living safely under the care of my parents, Vivian and Calvin. They had fought a brutal custody battle to keep her after my brother passed away, parading themselves as the devoted, loving grandparents. I stood up, pushing my chair back so hard it crashed to the floor. "Zuri, honey, listen to me carefully," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "Where are you right now?" She let out a small sob. "I am in the room above the cars. The heater stopped working, and I did not have any dinner. Grandma said I had to stay up here." I did not ask any more questions. I told her to hide under her blankets and that I was coming to get her right that very second. I grabbed my keys, slipped on my heavy wool trench coat, and ran to the elevator. The drive to my parents' neighborhood usually took 20 minutes, but I made it in 10, ignoring every speed limit and red light along the way. My parents lived in a sprawling 6,000 square foot mansion in one of Charlotte's most exclusive gated communities. They were pillars of their megachurch, heavily involved in local politics and deeply obsessed with their public image as an affluent, upstanding Black family. To the outside world, Vivian and Calvin were absolute perfection. I bypassed the main driveway to avoid triggering the front gate sensors and pulled my car up onto the wet grass near the side garage entrance. The massive house was entirely dark, silent, except for the howling wind. I ran up the side steps to the exterior door that led to the garage loft. I grabbed the heavy brass handle and twisted, but it was locked solid from the outside. A deadbolt. They had locked a 6-year-old child in a room from the outside. I did not waste time looking for a spare key. I took 2 steps back, raised my boot, and kicked the door squarely next to the strike plate with every ounce of strength I had. The wood splintered with a loud crack, and the door flew open. The security alarm immediately began blaring, a piercing siren that echoed through the entire estate. I rushed to the keypad on the wall and punched in the master code. I still remembered silencing the alarm instantly. The sudden quiet was heavy. The air inside the stairwell was freezing, significantly colder than the main house. I took the stairs 2 at a time and pushed open the door to the loft room. As a senior forensic wealth manager, I am trained to notice discrepancies. I notice when numbers do not align, when ledgers are manipulated, and when facades crack. Looking around that freezing room, my professional instincts merged with my maternal rage. I clicked on my phone flashlight and swept the beam across the space. It was a bare, unfinished storage room. Boxes of old holiday decorations and unused furniture were stacked against the walls. I noted the temperature, which could not have been more than 45 degrees. I noted the complete lack of a bathroom or running water. They had systematically isolated her. There, in the corner, lying on a thin air mattress directly on the hard floor, was Zuri. She was curled into a tight ball, wearing only a thin summer nightgown, clutching the glowing iPad to her chest. There were no blankets, just a flimsy throw cover. The single space heater in the corner was completely dead. I dropped to my knees and scooped her into my arms. She felt like ice. Her small frame was shivering uncontrollably, and her cheeks were stained with dried tears. I took off my heavy trench coat and wrapped it securely around her, burying her face in the warm wool. "You are safe now," I whispered, pressing my face into her hair. "Auntie has you." "I am so hungry," she cried, clinging to my neck with desperate strength. I stood up, carrying her tightly against my chest, grabbed her small backpack from the floor, and headed straight for the interior door that connected the garage loft to the main house kitchen. I marched through the dark, immaculate kitchen, my wet boots tracking mud and water all over Vivian's pristine white marble floors. I did not care. Every step I took was fueled by a blinding protective rage. I carried Zuri into the grand foyer, intending to walk straight out the front door and take her directly to a hospital to be checked for hypothermia and malnutrition. Just as my hand reached the front door handle, the digital lock clicked loudly. The heavy double doors swung open, letting in a gust of wet wind. Laughter spilled into the foyer, rich, booming, and entirely carefree. My mother Vivian and my father Calvin stepped inside, shaking rain from their umbrellas. Right behind them was my younger sister Alicia, the undisputed golden child of the family. They were dressed in thousands of dollars of formal wear, having clearly just returned from a high society charity gala. Vivian wore a stunning emerald green gown, and Calvin was in a tailored tuxedo smelling strongly of expensive bourbon and fine cigars. Their laughter died instantly when they saw me standing in the center of their foyer, soaking wet tracking mud on their custom Persian rug, holding a bundled-up child. Vivian's diamond earrings caught the chandelier light as she froze, her expression morphing from joyful elegance to immediate furious disdain. For a long second, nobody moved. The air in the foyer crackled with a tension so thick it felt like the thunderstorm had moved directly inside the house. I tightened my grip on Zuri, staring at the people who were supposed to be my family, realizing in that exact moment that the war had just begun. Vivian did not gasp in horror at the sight of her 6-year-old granddaughter shivering so violently my coat was vibrating. She did not drop her designer clutch or rush forward to check Zuri's freezing face. Instead, she looked down at the floor, her lips curling into a sneer of pure disgust. "What on earth are you doing, tracking mud all over my Persian rug?" Vivian snapped, her voice cutting through the foyer like a whip. I stared at her, letting the sheer absurdity of her words sink in. My boots were indeed leaving dark, wet footprints across the imported silk rug. But I was holding a child whose lips were tinted blue. Zuri whimpered, burying her face deeper into my neck, hiding from the woman who was supposed to be her caretaker. Vivian stood there, dripping in diamonds, her emerald green silk gown perfectly pressed, prioritizing a piece of woven fabric over human life. "You locked her in a freezing room over the garage," I said, keeping my voice dangerously low. "The power is out up there, Vivian. It is 40 degrees. Alicia rolled her eyes, stepping out from behind our mother. She casually adjusted the diamond necklace resting on her collarbone, looking at me as if I were a stray dog that had wandered into their pristine lives. "Oh, please, Kendra, do not start with your self-righteous routine." Alicia sighed, tossing her expensive evening bag onto a velvet chair. The child was throwing an absolute tantrum because she wanted some ridiculous snack before bed. She would not stop screaming, so she got put in timeout. "It is called discipline. You should look it up sometime." Timeout. I repeated the word, tasting like ash in my mouth. "You left her in a light summer nightgown on a bare floor without a blanket. She is sick. She is starving. She is manipulative, just like her mother. Vivian shot back, waving her hand dismissively. We feed her perfectly well. If she refuses to eat the organic meals our chef prepares, that is her own stubborn fault. We are not raising a spoiled brat in this house. Jamal would have wanted her raised with structure, not coddled every time she shed a fake tear to get her way. Hearing my late brother's name in her mouth made my chest tighten. Jamal had been the only buffer in this family, the only one who saw through the toxic perfection our parents projected to their church congregation. When he died 2 years ago, he left Zuri behind. Vivian and Calvin had immediately launched a vicious legal war to tear Zuri away from her mother, Chloe, dragging Chloe's name through the mud and parading themselves as the child's holy saviors. They did not fight for Zuri out of love. They fought for her because she was a physical piece of Jamal, a trophy to control, and a way to access the millions he left behind. And now this trophy was locked in a freezing storage room while they drank champagne and collected social accolades at a charity gala. Calvin stepped forward, bringing the sharp scent of expensive bourbon and cigar smoke into my personal space. He was a tall, imposing man who used his physical presence to intimidate anyone who dared question his authority in the boardroom or in his own home. He looked down at me, his eyes hard and unyielding. "Stop being so dramatic," Kendra, Calvin commanded, using the exact tone he reserved for insubordinate employees. "You burst into our home in the middle of the night, causing a scene over a basic disciplinary measure. You are a 35-year-old spinster with no husband and no children of your own. You have absolutely no idea how to discipline a child, let alone raise one." The insult was designed to sting, to put me back in my place as the family failure, the unmarried career woman who had rejected their traditional high society expectations. In the past, a comment like that would have sparked a screaming match. It would have ended with me in tears and my parents shaking their heads at my emotional instability, cementing my role as the crazy daughter. But I was no longer the insecure girl seeking their validation. I was a senior forensic wealth manager who spent my days dismantling corporate frauds and staring down aggressive executives. Calvin's petty insults meant absolutely nothing to me anymore. I knew exactly who I was, and I knew exactly what they were. I did not argue back. I did not shed a single tear or raise my voice. I simply tightened my hold on Zuri, feeling her tiny heartbeat fluttering rapidly against my chest. I shifted my weight and stepped around Calvin, ignoring his presence entirely. I walked toward the oak console table near the ornate staircase where Zuri's small pink backpack was sitting. I grabbed the strap with my free hand, slinging it securely over my shoulder. "What do you think you are doing?" Vivian demanded, her voice rising an octave as she realized I was not taking the bait. "I am leaving," I stated plainly, not looking back at her. "And I am taking Zuri with me. She needs a warm bed and a hot meal." Alicia laughed, a harsh grating sound that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. "You cannot just walk in here and take her, Kendra. You are losing your mind. Mom and Dad have full custody. They are her legal guardians." I kept walking, my wet boots squeaking against the polished hardwood floor. I was 3 steps away from the heavy double doors. I could feel the cold draft seeping through the weather stripping, promising a harsh exit into the storm outside. I did not care. My only objective was getting Zuri out of this pristine house of horrors and into the safety of my heated car. But as I reached for the brass handle, a heavy hand slammed flat against the wood right above my fingers. Calvin moved with a speed that belied his age, stepping directly into my path and pressing his entire body weight against the door. He blocked the exit completely, his broad shoulders filling my field of vision. The polite church-going patriarch vanished, replaced entirely by the ruthless man who destroyed anyone who defied him. He leaned down, his face inches from mine, his eyes dark with furious authority. "You walk out with Jamal's kid. I am calling the police for kidnapping." "Calvin," said his voice, a lethal whisper that vibrated with absolute certainty. "You have no legal rights here." I stare right back at him. My father relies on intimidation. He uses his height, his booming baritone voice, and his status as a church deacon to make people shrink. But I am not a junior associate or a terrified parishioner. I shift Zuri higher on my hip, feeling her tiny ribs pressing against my forearm through the fabric of my coat. With my free hand, I reach into my pocket and pull out my phone. I do not hesitate. I tap the screen dial 911 and press the speaker button. The dial tone echoes loudly in the grand foyer, bouncing off the imported marble and the crystal chandelier. Calvin's confident glare falters. His jaw twitches. I shove the phone directly toward his chest. Go ahead, I tell him, my voice dangerously calm. Tell them to come. Let us show the officers exactly what is going on here. Let us walk the police up to the garage loft. Let us show them the dead space heater, the bare floor, and the lock on the outside of the door. Let us explain to the authorities why your 6-year-old granddaughter is severely malnourished and freezing while you and Vivian were sipping champagne at the annual charity gala. The phone connects. A crisp voice fills the tense silence of the entryway. 911. What is your emergency? Vivian gasps, her hand flying to her pearl necklace. Kendra, have you lost your absolute mind? Hang that up right now. She looks terrified suddenly, picturing the flashing red and blue lights pulling into her perfectly manicured driveway. She pictures the neighbors watching. She pictures the scandal. Sir, the dispatcher's voice asks again. Do you have an emergency? I keep the phone extended toward my father. It is your call, Calvin. Tell the dispatcher you want to report a kidnapping. Tell them you want to report me for removing a child from a 40-degree room. Calvin stares at the phone as if it is a live explosive. For a man who controls every narrative, this is his ultimate nightmare. The raw, unfiltered truth being recorded on a police line. He looks at my mother, whose eyes are wide with panic. Alicia stands frozen by the staircase, her previous smirk entirely gone. My father knows I'm not bluffing. He knows I have the photos and the time-stamped video of that room. He knows that if the police walk through that door, his pristine social empire crumbles before sunrise. Everything is fine, Officer Calvin barks into the phone, his voice tight with suppressed rage. It was an accidental dial. My apologies. Are you certain, sir? We can send a squad car to confirm, the dispatcher replies. I said everything is fine. Calvin snaps, ending the call himself. He breathes heavily, his chest heaving under his tailored tuxedo. The mask of the benevolent patriarch is entirely gone, replaced by pure venomous hatred. Move, I command. Calvin slowly steps aside, his hands clenched into tight fists at his sides. As I walk past him, Vivian finds her voice again. You are making a terrible mistake, Kendra. You have always been jealous of this family. You have always wanted to destroy what we built. Jamal would be ashamed of you. I stop right at the threshold. I turn back to look at my mother taking in her designer gown and her flawless makeup. Jamal is dead because the pressure of being your perfect son drove him into the ground, and I will not let you do the same thing to his daughter. Do not ever contact me again. Alicia crosses her arms, trying to regain her usual bratty confidence. You cannot afford to raise a kid anyway, Kendra. You spend all your money on your fancy downtown life. You will come crawling back when you realize how hard it is. I do not bother giving Alicia a response. She has always been financially illiterate, floating on our parents' credit cards. I turn my back on them, push the heavy oak door open, and step out into the pouring rain. The storm is still raging, the wind whipping cold water against my face, but I barely feel it. I rush to my SUV parked on the wet grass. I open the back door gently, place Zuri into her booster seat, and buckle her in securely. She is still clutching the iPad to her chest, her large brown eyes wide with fear. Are they going to put me back in the dark box, Auntie? She whispers, her teeth chattering. I grab a thick fleece blanket from the trunk and wrap it around her shoulders, tucking it tightly around her freezing legs. I wipe a stray raindrop from her forehead. No, baby. Nobody is ever putting you in a dark box again. I promise you. I slam the door shut, get into the driver's seat, and start the engine. I crank the heat to maximum, the warm air blasting through the vents. I throw the car into reverse, my tires tearing deep, muddy ruts into Vivian's immaculate front lawn as I peel out of the estate. I hit the main road, leaving the gated community behind, my heart pounding a steady, relentless rhythm against my ribs. The adrenaline is starting to recede, replaced by the cold, calculating mindset of my profession. As a senior forensic wealth manager, I spend my life anticipating counter moves. I know my parents are not going to let this go. They view Zuri as their property, a vital piece of their public image, as the tragic, devoted grandparents raising their late son's child. I need to get Zuri fed, examined by a doctor, and then I need to contact my legal team. I mentally list out my assets, my emergency funds, and the retainer fees for the best family law attorney in Charlotte. I reach over to the passenger seat and pick up my phone to call my private pediatrician. As the screen lights up, a severe vibration shakes the device in my hand. A priority banking alert flashes across the lock screen, then another, and a third. I tap the notification, my stomach dropping as the mobile banking app opens. Access denied. Account frozen. I stare at the bright red text, warning me to contact the primary trust administrator. A wave of profound realization washes over me. Years ago, before Jamal died, I had restructured the entire family's financial architecture to maximize tax benefits. I had linked my personal checking, my savings, and my emergency liquid funds to the overarching umbrella of the family trust. I did it to build generational wealth, assuming my own blood family would never weaponize it against me. I was wrong. Calvin and Vivian did not waste a single second. While I was driving through the storm trying to warm up a freezing child, they had logged into the primary portal and completely locked me out of my own money. They had frozen every single cent to my name. They thought they could starve me out. They thought paralyzing me financially would force me to turn the car around and hand Zuri back to them. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I have a traumatized 6-year-old child in the back seat who needs immediate medical attention, and I currently have zero access to my own wealth. I drove through the storm with a singular focus, keeping my niece safe. The flashing red alert on my banking app declaring my accounts frozen was meant to break me, but Vivian and Calvin severely underestimated my preparation. You do not survive as a Black woman in the ruthless sector of corporate forensic wealth management without building contingencies. I had a fireproof safe in my penthouse holding enough physical cash to sustain us for 6 months. I did not need their trust fund to buy a hot meal. Once we reached my secure building in uptown Charlotte, I drew a hot bath for Zuri. I washed the grime and cold from her fragile body, dressed her in an oversized cashmere sweater of mine, and fed her a bowl of warm chicken soup. She did not speak. She just clung to my sleeve, her huge brown eyes darting around the expansive glass walls of my living room, as if expecting Calvin to smash through them. I tucked her into my plush guest bed, pulling 3 heavy down comforters over her small frame. I sat beside her in the dark, stroking her natural curls, until her ragged breathing smoothed out into a deep, exhausted sleep. I did not close my eyes once that night. I sat in the living room watching the city skyline, listening to the rain fade into a bleak gray dawn, waiting for my parents' next move. It came exactly at 6 in the morning. The pounding on my reinforced mahogany door was not a polite knock. It was the aggressive, rhythmic hammering of law enforcement. Charlotte Mecklenburg Police. Open the door immediately. I checked my security monitor. 4 officers were standing in my hallway too, with their hands resting dangerously close to their holsters. Vivian had not just called the cops. She had painted a very specific, very dangerous picture of me to ensure they arrived expecting a threat. I tightened the belt of my silk robe, took a slow, stabilizing breath, and pulled open the heavy door. "Are you Kendra?" the lead officer asked, stepping forward, immediately invading my personal space. His eyes scanned the pristine modern lines of my penthouse, clearly surprised that the alleged violent kidnapper lived in a multi-million-dollar property. "I am," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly level and devoid of any emotion that could be weaponized against me. "Ma'am, we received a frantic call from your mother Vivian at 3 this morning. She stated that you experienced a severe mental breakdown, violently kicked down the side door of her residence while she was sleeping, and snatched your late brother's 6-year-old daughter. We need to see the child right now, and you need to step out into the hallway. You are facing felony home invasion and kidnapping charges." The sheer audacity of my mother's lie almost made me laugh. Vivian knew exactly what she was doing, playing the frail, traumatized grandmother whose unstable spinster daughter had finally snapped. She was banking on the police treating me like a hysterical criminal. She wanted me arrested, dragged out in handcuffs, and Zuri thrown right back into that freezing garage loft. Officers, I said, holding my ground at the threshold. I am not stepping into the hallway, and I am certainly not waking up a traumatized child who is finally sleeping in a warm bed. My mother is a very convincing liar, but I am a forensic wealth manager. I do not deal in hysterics. I deal in hard data and time-stamped evidence. I pulled my phone from my pocket. I did not give them a chance to argue. I tapped the screen and held it up right in front of the lead officer's face. I hit play. The video I had taken just hours ago filled the quiet hallway. The audio picked up the howling storm outside the dead silence of the main house and the harsh draft whistling through the unheated garage room. The camera panned across the bare concrete floor, the broken space heater, and finally settled on the digital thermometer, reading 42 degrees. Then the video showed a tiny shivering Zuri, huddled on a deflated air mattress, clutching an iPad. I took this video at 11:45 last night, I stated coldly. My niece was locked in that room from the outside. She was malnourished, freezing, and suffering from a respiratory infection. I did not break into a sleeping house. I extracted a child from an abusive environment. The lead officer frowned, his aggressive posture faltering as he watched the irrefutable footage. But your mother filed a sworn statement that she was asleep in her bed when you broke in. She said she woke up to the sound of breaking glass and you screaming. I swiped my phone screen directly over to Instagram. I pulled up the official page for the Charlotte Children's Charity Gala. I tapped on a high-resolution photo posted just 6 hours ago. There, standing in front of a glittering ice sculpture, were Calvin and Vivian. Vivian was wearing her emerald green silk gown, holding a crystal flute of champagne and flashing her perfect practice smile at the cameras. The timestamp on the event photographer's post was 11:30 p.m. My parents were not sleeping. I told the officers, my voice ringing with absolute authority. They were drinking champagne at a luxury gala while their granddaughter was locked in a freezing garage to punish her for wanting a snack. I kicked the door because it was dead-bolted from the outside. I dialed 911 from my own phone in their foyer, and my father forced me to hang up. You can check your own dispatch logs from midnight to verify the dropped call from this exact number. The four officers exchanged heavy, tired glances. The dangerous tension in the hallway completely dissolved, replaced by the weary realization that they had been deployed as pawns in a wealthy family's power play. The lead officer let out a long breath and stepped back, removing his hand from his belt. "Ma'am," he said, his tone entirely different now, professional and subdued. "We are going to note the evidence you provided in our system. Because you are the child's biological aunt, and there is conflicting evidence regarding her living conditions, this is no longer a criminal kidnapping case. This is a civil custody dispute. We are not taking the child today. But you need to retain a family lawyer immediately because your parents are actively coming for you." "I know," I said. "Thank you for your time, officers." I closed the heavy mahogany door and locked the deadbolt, leaning my forehead against the cool wood for just a fraction of a second. I had won the battle at the door, but I knew Vivian well enough to know she never relied on just one strategy. If the police could not drag me out in handcuffs, she would pivot immediately to her favorite battlefield, the court of public opinion. My phone buzzed in my hand. Then it buzzed again. Suddenly, a cascade of 50 back-to-back notifications flooded my screen. Text messages from cousins, emails from church members, and missed calls from people I had not spoken to in years. I opened my social media app. Right at the top of my feed was a notification from the massive community prayer group run by my mother. Vivian was broadcasting a Facebook Live video. She was sitting in her lavish living room, perfectly styled, but completely stripped of her gala makeup, looking pale and devastated. She was weeping into a tissue, her voice trembling with manufactured heartbreak as she stared into the camera. "Please pray for our family," Vivian sobbed, dabbing at her dry eyes. "My wayward, rebellious daughter Kendra has suffered a complete mental break. She violently attacked our home in the middle of the night and stole our late son's precious little girl. We are terrified for Zuri's safety. Please pray that the Lord brings our baby back to us before Kendra does something unthinkable. The notifications from Vivian's tearful Facebook Live broadcast were still flooding my screen when I stepped out of the private elevator and into the immaculate glass-walled lobby of my wealth management firm. It was 8 in the morning. My phone was vibrating constantly in my palm, a relentless drumbeat of outrage from church members, distant relatives, and family friends who had swallowed my mother's performance hook, line, and sinker. They genuinely believed I was a mentally unstable spinster who had violently kidnapped my niece in a fit of jealous rage. I silenced the device and slipped it into the pocket of my tailored blazer. I had already secured Zuri in a private suite with a trusted, highly vetted trauma nanny. My immediate focus was damage control and unfreezing my assets. I was walking toward the reception desk to instruct the front desk manager to decline any calls from the press when the heavy double doors of the main entrance violently swung open. Alicia stormed into the hushed, mahogany-paneled lobby like a hurricane in designer heels. She was wearing oversized sunglasses, a pristine beige trench coat, and an expression of absolute unhinged fury. She completely ignored the security perimeter, pushing past a bewildered junior analyst and marching directly across the imported marble floor toward me. "Kendra!" Alicia screamed, her shrill voice shattering the quiet professional atmosphere of the firm. Several senior partners stopped in their tracks, turning to stare. The receptionist gasped, her hand hovering over the panic button. I did not flinch. I turned slowly, planting my feet and crossing my arms over my chest, watching my younger sister march up to me. She tore her sunglasses off her face and pointed a manicured finger directly at my chest. "You are entirely out of your mind," Alicia shouted, her chest heaving. "You have always been jealous of Jamal, and now you are using his half-white kid to punish Mom and Dad. You are pathetic, Kendra. You could never get a man. You could never give this family a grandchild of your own, so you just steal one in the middle of the night to make yourself feel important." The entire lobby went dead silent. The only sound was the low hum of the air conditioning. As a forensic wealth manager, I spend my days dismantling hostile corporate executives and exposing complex financial crimes. Alicia's temper tantrum was child's play. I stepped directly into her space, using my height and absolute calm to force her to take a step backward. "Using her," I said, keeping my voice dangerously low and steady, ensuring the acoustics of the quiet lobby carried every single word to my colleagues. "You mean exactly like Mom and Dad used Chloe?" Alicia's face flushed a deep, ugly red at the mention of our former sister-in-law. "Do not bring her into this. Chloe was a mess. She was unfit to raise a dog, let alone a child. Mom and Dad saved Zuri from that disaster." I stepped closer, my eyes locking onto hers, refusing to let her look away. "Chloe was not a disaster, Alicia. Chloe was a shattered widow. When Jamal died 2 years ago, Chloe was drowning in severe grief and acute postpartum depression. She was a young, devastated mother who needed psychiatric support, grace, and a loving family to help her survive the worst tragedy of her life. But Vivian and Calvin did not offer her a shoulder to cry on. They did not pay for therapy or offer to help her carry the burden. They saw a vulnerability, and they exploited it. Alicia scoffed, rolling her eyes and placing a hand on her hip. "She could barely get out of bed, Kendra. Zuri needed structure." "Zuri needed her mother!" I fired back, my voice hardening like steel. "But Mom and Dad wanted total control. They wanted Jamal's daughter as a prop for their Sunday morning church appearances, and they wanted unrestricted access to the multi-million-dollar estate Jamal left behind in trust for his child. So they hired a team of ruthless litigators to legally bury a grieving woman. They spread vicious manufactured rumors to their high society friends and country club associates, painting Chloe as an unfit, drug-addicted junkie. They paid for private investigators to stalk her, they falsified reports to Child Protective Services, and they threatened to financially ruin Chloe's middle-class parents if she dared to fight them in a courtroom. They legally bullied a fragile, heartbroken woman until she completely broke and surrendered custody just to escape their torment. That is how the world works, Kendra Alicia spat back, completely unbothered by the sheer depravity of our parents' actions. The strong survive. Chloe was weak. Zuri belongs with real family, people who can actually provide for her and protect her. Protect her. I repeated, a cold laugh escaping my lips. By locking her in an unheated concrete storage room without food or running water, while you three drank vintage champagne and posed for cameras. That is not protection, Alicia. That is abuse. And I have the video evidence to prove exactly what happened last night. Your public relations spin is going to burn to the ground, and I am going to hold the match. Alicia opened her mouth to scream another insult, but I was done entertaining her. I did not engage in a screaming match. I simply raised my hand and gave a sharp, subtle nod to Marcus, the towering head of building security, who had quietly positioned himself a few feet away. Marcus and another burly security guard immediately stepped forward, flanking Alicia seamlessly. They grabbed her firmly by the elbows, lifting her slightly off the ground. "Get your hands off me!" Alicia shrieked, thrashing wildly. Her designer handbag swung through the air, completely missing Marcus's head. "Do you know who my father is? I will have your jobs. I will sue this entire building, ma'am." "It is time to leave," Marcus stated in a bored, authoritative monotone, dragging her backward across the marble floor toward the elevator bank. Alicia dug her expensive heels into the ground, but she was entirely no match for the two security professionals. They pulled her backward into the open elevator car. As the guard stepped back to let the heavy steel doors close, Alicia yanked one arm free. She straightened her ruined trench coat, her face twisting from frantic rage into a victorious, ugly smirk. "You think you are so smart, Kendra?" Alicia sneered, her voice echoing out into the lobby. "But you are already too late. We already filed an emergency ex parte hearing for tomorrow morning. You are losing Zuri, and we are suing you for emotional distress." The polished steel doors slid shut, cutting off her laughter, and leaving me standing in the center of the silent lobby, the reality of her words settling over me like a heavy winter chill. The polished steel doors of the elevator slid shut, sealing Alicia and her screaming tantrum away from my floor. A heavy silence draped over the firm's reception area. Junior analysts and senior partners alike were frozen at their desks, staring in my direction. I did not offer them a reassuring smile or a frantic explanation. I simply smoothed the lapels of my tailored blazer, gave a curt nod of thanks to Marcus, our head of security, and turned on my heel. My heels clicked against the imported marble in a steady, rhythmic cadence as I walked straight down the glass-walled corridor toward my corner office. I could feel their eyes tracking me, but I paid them no mind. In the high-stakes world of forensic wealth management, you do not survive by showing weakness or entertaining public spectacles. You survive by maintaining absolute unshakable control over every variable in your environment. I closed my heavy, solid oak office door behind me, blocking out the stares and the frantic whispers of my colleagues. The panoramic view of the Charlotte skyline stretched out beyond my floor to ceiling windows, bathed in the harsh, bright light of the early morning sun. I stood looking out at the waking city, analyzing Alicia's parting threat with the cold, calculated precision of a woman who dismantles hostile corporate takeovers and tracks hidden offshore assets for a living. An emergency ex parte hearing. It was a classic aggressive Calvin Wilson maneuver. In the legal world, an ex parte motion meant one party was asking a judge for an immediate emergency custody order without the other party being present or even notified of the proceedings. Calvin and Vivian had clearly mobilized their high-priced legal team before dawn. They were intentionally bypassing standard family court procedures, claiming I was an imminent physical threat to Zuri. They wanted a judge to sign a legally binding order demanding law enforcement batter down the door to my secure penthouse and rip that little girl out of her warm bed before I even had a chance to hire a defense attorney. Calvin likely called Judge Harrison Abernathy, his longtime country club golf partner, to push the paperwork through the morning docket. It was a vicious blitzkrieg tactic designed to crush me before I could formulate a proper counterattack. They thought I was scrambling. They thought freezing my personal accounts and threatening me with immediate arrest would force me into a state of blind, paralyzing panic. They expected me to show up at the downtown courthouse, screaming and crying, playing perfectly into their carefully constructed narrative of the unstable, hysterical spinster daughter who had finally lost her grip on reality. They were gravely mistaken. I walked around my massive mahogany desk and sat in my leather executive chair. I bypassed my primary firm-issued computer entirely. Calvin was an exceptionally powerful man with a far-reaching network of unsavory contacts. If he could freeze my personal banking within minutes of me driving away from his estate, he could absolutely hire private corporate intelligence to monitor my digital footprint and track my network activity. Instead, I reached beneath my desk feeling for the hidden biometric lock mechanism I had installed myself months ago. I pressed my thumb against the small sensor. A heavy metallic click resonated in the quiet room, and the bottom right drawer slid open smoothly on its tracks. Inside lay the culmination of 2 years of silent, meticulous investigative work. There was a sleek offline laptop, a stack of heavily encrypted hard drives, and a physical ledger bound in black leather. I had not just been mourning my brother Jamal for the past 24 months. I had been hunting. When Vivian and Calvin destroyed Chloe's life, they left a massive paper trail. Arrogance always leaves a paper trail. They had painted Chloe as an unfit, drug-addicted junkie to their high society friends and manipulated the family court system. They claimed she was a severe danger to herself and her child. But my forensic audits told a completely different, horrifying story. I had tracked the massive wire transfers Calvin sent to a highly questionable private rehabilitation facility in upstate New York, paying them to falsify admission records. I found the off-the-book cash payments made to the esteemed family therapist who suddenly recommended Vivian be granted full permanent custody. I traced the money Vivian used to hire private investigators to stalk Chloe, relentlessly documenting her every move during the absolute darkest days of her acute postpartum depression and raw, paralyzing grief. My parents had completely manufactured a legal narrative to steal Jamal's daughter and gain unfettered access to the millions he left behind in her trust fund. I reached into the very back of the drawer and pulled out a cheap plastic prepaid burner phone. It was completely untraceable, bought with physical cash at a random convenience store 3 towns over. It was not connected to any network tied to the Wilson family or my corporate firm. I had kept it powered off and hidden under lock and key for exactly this moment. I pressed the power button, holding the small device in the palm of my hand, as the bright screen flared to life. It took 30 agonizing seconds to find a cellular signal. I opened the contacts application. There was only one single number saved in the directory, listed simply under the letter C. For 2 long years, my parents thought Chloe had crawled into a hole and disappeared forever, defeated by their endless financial resources and vicious legal bullying. They thought they had broken her spirit entirely. They had no idea that I had secretly relocated her the very night she lost custody. They did not know I had established a blind trust in Delaware to quietly fund her aggressive legal retainer, her specialized grief counseling, and her private living expenses in a secure gated community completely out of state. I had spent 24 months putting Jamal's widow back together piece by piece, preparing her for the exact day we would finally strike back and reclaim her daughter. My parents thought this war started last night when I kicked down their garage door. They did not realize they had been outmaneuvered 2 years ago. I tapped the green call button and lifted the cheap plastic phone to my ear. It rang exactly once. A woman's voice answered, sharp and immediately alert. Chloe had been waiting for this call. Chloe. I say, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register, ensuring the sound does not carry beyond the thick glass walls of my office. It is Kendra. The timeline just moved up. It is time. Ex-parte hearings are the legal system's version of a midnight ambush. They are designed to happen entirely in the shadows, entirely one-sided, allowing a judge to sign emergency orders without the opposing party ever knowing they were in the crosshairs until the police show up at their door with a battering ram. It is a favored aggressive tactic of the wealthy and well-connected to secure immediate custody freeze bank assets and completely dictate the narrative before a single piece of actual evidence can be reviewed by the court. If Alicia had kept her mouth shut in my firm's lobby, I would have been completely blind to the legal guillotine swinging down toward my neck. Her arrogant, screaming taunt was a tactical error of catastrophic proportions. By bragging about their secret legal maneuver, she gave me exactly 12 hours to prepare for absolute war. I walked through the heavy, brass-handled doors of courtroom 4B at 8:30 sharp the next morning. My attorney David Vance walked calmly beside me. David was a razor-sharp family law litigator who moved with the quiet, lethal efficiency of a shark in bloody water. The moment we stepped into the gallery, the air in the room instantly shifted. Vivian and Calvin were already seated at the petitioner's table. Vivian had expertly styled herself for the role of the devastated, God-fearing grandmother. She was dressed in her absolute Sunday best, wearing a modest, tailored powder blue skirt suit that screamed conservative respectability. Her hair was pulled back into a severe, elegant chignon, and she clutched a vintage lace handkerchief tightly in her manicured hands. Calvin sat beside her, the very picture of stoic paternal grief. He wore a dark charcoal suit, his broad shoulders squared, radiating the quiet, intimidating authority of a man who owned entire city blocks. They had hired Richard Sterling, the most expensive, ruthless family attorney in Charlotte. Sterling was a legal mercenary who specialized in destroying people for the city's elite. He was currently leaning over the oak table, whispering intensely into Calvin's ear. When they saw me walk down the center aisle and take my seat at the respondent's table, Vivian's eyes widened in genuine, unfiltered shock. She had fully expected to be standing before an empty table presenting her unopposed lies to a sympathetic judge. Judge Harrison Abernathy took the bench. I knew his face well. Calvin played 18 holes with Judge Abernathy at the Quail Hollow Club on the first and third Sunday of every single month. The old boys' network was alive well and actively colluding against me. Abernathy looked down from the high bench, his expression hardening with clear patriarchal disdain the moment his eyes landed on me. Sterling did not waste a single second. He launched into his opening statement with the theatrical flair of a seasoned actor playing to a captive audience. He was not just arguing a legal motion, he was painting a masterpiece of complete and utter fiction. Your Honor, we are here today under the most dire and terrifying circumstances. Sterling began, his voice echoing off the wood-paneled walls. My clients, Calvin and Vivian Wilson, are the legally appointed guardians of their 6-year-old granddaughter, Zuri. They have provided a stable, loving Christian home for this beautiful child ever since the tragic, untimely passing of their beloved son, Jamal. Sterling paced slowly in front of the judge's bench, gesturing dramatically toward his clients. Vivian lifted her lace handkerchief to her face, dabbing at the corners of her eyes. She did not smear her waterproof mascara. Her shoulders gave a slight, perfectly timed tremble. It was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. Yesterday, in the dead of night, the peace of their home was violently shattered. Sterling continued, his voice rising in volume and indignation. The respondent, Kendra Wilson, experienced what can only be described as a severe psychotic break. She arrived at my client's estate unannounced, violently kicked a reinforced exterior door entirely off its hinges, and abducted a sleeping child directly from her bed. I sat completely still, my hands folded neatly on the table in front of me. I felt David shift beside me, preparing to object to the inflammatory language, but I placed a firm hand on his forearm. I gave him a subtle, sharp shake of my head. I wanted Sterling to keep talking. I wanted every single one of his lies logged permanently into the official court reporter's transcript. Arrogance is a massive liability in a financial audit, and it is a fatal flaw in a courtroom. Sterling pivoted, aiming his venom directly at me. Miss Wilson is an unstable, career-obsessed woman who has long harbored a deep-seated jealousy of her late brother and his offspring. She has no maternal instincts, no husband, and absolutely no capacity to care for a child with special emotional needs. She snatched this little girl out of pure spite, weaponizing a traumatized orphan to punish her parents for perceived historical slights. He paused, letting the heavy accusation hang in the silent room. My clients, acting as responsible fiduciaries of the family trust, were forced to freeze Miss Wilson's personal accounts early yesterday morning to prevent her from fleeing the state jurisdiction with the child. We believe she is erratic, dangerous, and a severe flight risk. We are respectfully requesting that this court issue an immediate emergency order compelling law enforcement to breach her residence, retrieve the child, and return Zuri to her lawful, loving grandparents. Judge Abernathy nodded slowly, his face grave with manufactured concern. He looked entirely convinced by the performance. He peered down at me over the rim of his reading glasses, his eyes filled with judgment. "This is a highly disturbing narrative," Mr. Sterling. Judge Abernathy said, his tone thick with sympathetic bias toward my father. He turned his heavy gaze to my table. "Miss Wilson, this is an emergency ex parte proceeding. Given the violent nature of your actions as described here and the sworn notarized affidavits from your own parents corroborating this home invasion, I am heavily inclined to sign this retrieval order right this very second. You are facing severe legal consequences. Do you have anything to say before I mandate the police to go to your home and retrieve that little girl?" The courtroom held its breath. Vivian lowered her lace handkerchief, a tiny triumphant smirk playing at the very edge of her lips. She thought she had won. She thought the power of Calvin's golf buddy and her own crocodile tears had successfully painted me into an inescapable corner. They expected me to panic. They expected me to yell, to cry, to frantically try and explain myself, playing perfectly into their carefully constructed narrative of the hysterical, unhinged spinster. I let them finish their theatrical performance. Then I stand up. I smooth the lapels of my dark blazer, keeping my posture impeccably straight and my expression completely devoid of emotion. I don't play with emotions. I play with data. I reach into the thick manila folder resting on my table and extract a multi-page document stamped with an official hospital seal. "Your Honor," I say, my voice ringing out with cold, clinical authority. "Opposing counsel has painted a very vivid picture of a kidnapping. But you cannot kidnap a child who is actively being subjected to severe physical abuse and criminal neglect." I step forward and submit my first secret weapon to the judge, the pediatric urgent care report from 2 a.m. the previous night. I slide the thick cream-colored paper across the polished wood of the respondent table. The bailiff, a heavy-set man with a perpetually bored expression, steps forward. He takes the document from my hand and carries it up to the high bench. Judge Abernathy adjusts his gold-rimmed reading glasses. He picks up the file with a heavy sigh, clearly expecting to glance at some trivial, easily dismissible counterclaim designed to delay his morning golf game. I watch his eyes scan the first page. I watch his brow furrow. I watch the precise, undeniable moment the color drains entirely from his face. "What you are holding, Your Honor, is a certified time-stamped pediatric urgent care evaluation from 2 o'clock this morning," I state, my voice carrying clearly and sharply through the silent courtroom. After my parents unlawfully froze my personal banking assets in a failed attempt to prevent me from seeking medical care, I used physical cash to secure a private emergency pediatric physician. Dr. Eris Thorne evaluated my 6-year-old niece. The clinical findings are explicitly detailed on page 2. Richard Sterling jumps to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Objection, Your Honor. We have not been provided a copy of this alleged medical report. My clients have the right to review any." Judge Abernathy holds up a single rigid hand, silencing the high-priced lawyer instantly. Abernathy's eyes remain glued to the paper. "The report confirms that Zuri was suffering from early-stage hypothermia when I extracted her from the Wilson estate." I continue, relentlessly driving the facts into the official public record. Her core body temperature had dropped to dangerous levels due to prolonged exposure in an unheated room. Furthermore, the blood panels indicate a severe caloric deficit. But the most alarming finding is the chronic upper respiratory infection that has clearly gone untreated for several weeks. My niece was not placed in a brief, harmless timeout. She was subjected to calculated, systematic physical neglect. Judge Abernathy finally looks up from the paperwork. He looks directly at Calvin. The silent communication between the two men is heavy and palpable. Calvin is staring back silently, demanding loyalty. He is demanding that the country club code of silence protect him, expecting his friend to sweep this under the rug. But Abernathy is a judge, sitting in a public courtroom with a court reporter typing every single word into a permanent transcript. A certified, legally binding medical document detailing severe child abuse is a radioactive liability. Abernathy is not going to risk his pension, his gavel, or his entire legal reputation to cover up for Calvin's grotesque parenting choices. Mr. Sterling. Judge Abernathy begins his voice completely devoid of the warm, familial sympathy he had displayed just 5 minutes earlier. This medical documentation severely contradicts the sworn affidavits provided by your clients this morning. A locked, unheated garage structure is not a recognized disciplinary tool. It is child endangerment. Sterling opens his mouth to speak, but the judge cuts him off immediately, banging his gavel once. I am denying the emergency ex parte motion to return the child to Calvin and Vivian Wilson. The judge declares his tone absolute. The kidnapping allegations are entirely baseless. Temporary emergency guardianship is hereby granted to Kendra Wilson, effective immediately. Furthermore, I am ordering an immediate comprehensive investigation by Child Protective Services into the living conditions at the Wilson estate. We are adjourned. The sharp crack of the gavel echoes like a gunshot. Calvin's face flushes a dark, dangerous shade of purple. The thick veins in his neck bulge against his starched white collar. Vivian crushes the delicate lace handkerchief in her fists, her knuckles turning bone white. Sterling rapidly shoves his files into his leather briefcase, aggressively whispering to Calvin to remain silent and not cause a scene on the official record. I do not wait around to watch them unravel. I gather my single manila folder, nod respectfully to my attorney David, and walk calmly down the center aisle. I push through the heavy wooden double doors and step out into the expansive marble-floored hallway of the family court building. I am halfway to the elevator bank when I hear the aggressive, rapid clicking of designer heels echoing behind me. Kendra. The voice is not the weeping, fragile tone Vivian used for her church prayer group broadcast. It is a harsh, venomous hiss. I turn slowly. Vivian stalks toward me, leaving Calvin and their lawyer pacing by the courtroom doors. The mask of the devoted, heartbroken grandmother has completely burned away. Her eyes are narrowed into hard, malicious slits. She stops 2 feet away from me, her expensive floral perfume suffocating the narrow space between us. You think you have won? Vivian sneers, her voice vibrating with pure, unadulterated malice. You think walking out of that room with a temporary piece of paper makes you a savior. You are a fool, Kendra. A naive, arrogant fool. I stare at her, keeping my face perfectly blank, letting her exhaust her anger. She leans in closer, dropping her voice to a harsh, ragged whisper. Jamal left a $3 million trust fund for Zuri when he died. $3 million intended to provide for her future. And Calvin and I are the sole unrestricted trustees. We control every single penny of that money. Vivian tilts her head, a cruel, calculating smile spreading across her flawlessly made-up face. We will completely cut off all financial support for that child. We will strictly refuse to release a single dime for her education, her medical care, or her daily needs. And while you try to drain your own meager savings to keep her afloat, Calvin and I are going to hire a fleet of the most aggressive appellate lawyers on the East Coast. We will file motion after motion. We will drag you into endless depositions. We will demand psychological evaluations. We will tie you up in this courthouse for the next decade. We will bleed you absolutely dry in legal fees, Kendra. You will be buried in so much debt you will be begging us to take her back just so you can afford to pay your rent. And that child will never see a dime of her father's money. She stands there breathing heavily, waiting for my reaction. She wants me to scream. She wants me to show fear. She wants the desperate validation of knowing she still holds the ultimate power over my life and my finances. I look at the woman who raised me, the woman who actively destroyed my brother and his wife, the woman who locked a 6-year-old child in a freezing room to teach her a lesson. I do not offer a single word of rebuttal. I do not raise my voice or defend my financial stability. I simply look her dead in the eye and let a slow, freezing smile spread across my face. I turn my back on her mid-breath, step into the waiting elevator, and press the button for the lobby. I walk out of the courthouse and drive straight back to my corporate office. I bypass the reception desk, walk into my suite, and lock the heavy oak door behind me. I sit down at my desk, open the hidden drawer, and boot up my heavily encrypted laptop. The glow of my encrypted laptop illuminated the darkened corners of my office. I cracked my knuckles, the sound sharp in the quiet room, and let my fingers hover over the keyboard. Vivian's hallway threat was still ringing in my ears, but she had fundamentally misunderstood the board we were playing on. She thought she was playing family court checkers. I was playing multi-jurisdictional financial chess. Calvin and Vivian had always been brilliant at manipulating people, but they were utterly illiterate when it came to modern digital finance. 7 years ago, right after I passed my certification exams, my father tasked me with restructuring the entire family portfolio. He wanted to minimize tax liabilities and shield assets from corporate audits. I built them an airtight financial architecture, a fortress of diversified holdings and offshore accounts. What Calvin completely failed to realize was that when you hire an architect to build your fortress, the architect always keeps a copy of the blueprints, and they always build a back door. I initiated a sequence of secure virtual private networks bouncing my IP address across 3 different continents before connecting to the central banking server. I was not hacking. I was simply walking through the digital service entrance I had coded myself and never officially closed. My screen filled with lines of routing numbers, transaction histories, and encrypted account balances. I bypassed my parents' primary checking and savings accounts entirely. I did not care about their country club dues or their gala sponsorships. I ran a targeted search algorithm specifically for the trust fund established by Jamal before his death. Jamal had been meticulous. He loved Chloe and Zuri with fierce devotion, and he had secured a $3 million life insurance policy and liquid estate to ensure they would never struggle if the worst happened. When Calvin and Vivian legally bullied Chloe into surrendering custody, they also seized control of that trust, installing themselves as the sole fiduciaries. A fiduciary is legally obligated to act entirely in the best financial interest of the beneficiary. Vivian had just promised to use that very money to bleed me dry and leave Zuri with nothing. It was time to see exactly how she planned to do it. I located the primary account number for Zuri's trust. I hit enter. The digital ledger populated instantly, and the very first thing I noticed made my breath catch in my throat. The balance was wrong. It was catastrophically wrong. An index fund of $3 million properly managed and left untouched for 2 years should have accrued significant interest. Even with a conservative investment strategy, the balance should have been comfortably over $3.2 million. The number staring back at me in stark white font was just under $800,000. My eyes narrowed. $2.2 million did not simply evaporate into the ether. I cracked my neck and leaned closer to the screen, my forensic instincts kicking into overdrive. I isolated the transaction history for the past 24 months, sorting the data by withdrawal amounts. The screen flooded with red text. Massive, regular capital extractions. Calvin had not made one large withdrawal. He was siphoning the money out systematically, utilizing a complex labyrinth of shell accounts to mask the final destination. It was a classic layering technique designed to confuse auditors and obscure the money trail. He would move $50,000 into a holding company in Delaware, fragment that amount into 5 smaller wires, route those through a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands, and then bounce them back to a domestic commercial account. It was a decent effort for a man who learned everything he knew about money in the 1990s. But against a lead forensic wealth manager, it was incredibly sloppy. I launched a tracing software suite I had custom built for my firm. I fed the routing numbers of the Delaware holding companies into the program and instructed it to follow the money backward. I watched the progress bar inch across my screen, dismantling Calvin's pathetic attempts at financial obfuscation, layer by layer. Every time he tried to hide the funds behind a corporate veil, my software pierced it. Every time he used a registered agent to mask ownership, I pulled the corresponding tax identification numbers. I tracked the digital breadcrumbs through 4 different states and 2 offshore tax havens. The web of transactions was chaotic, designed to look like routine corporate investment overhead. But numbers never lie. They always lead to a single point of convergence. The software chimed a soft, polite ping that echoed loudly in my silent office. The progress bar hit 100%. The tracing algorithm had unraveled the entire web. The dozens of fragmented transactions, the offshore detours, the holding company transfers, they all funneled directly into one single domestic commercial checking account. I highlighted the final routing number and ran it against the state corporate registry. The database took 2 seconds to cross-reference the information and spit out the registered business name. I sat back in my leather executive chair, staring at the screen in absolute chilling disbelief. The final destination for Jamal's life insurance money was a corporate account registered to Aura Holdings LLC. Aura was the name of the high-end luxury boutique my sister Alicia had opened in downtown Charlotte 18 months ago. I let out a slow, sharp breath. Alicia had marketed Aura as her self-made entrepreneurial triumph. She bragged endlessly on social media about her sharp business acumen and her exclusive inventory of imported European designer goods. But the retail market in downtown Charlotte was ruthless, and Alicia had absolutely zero concept of inventory management or overhead cost control. I had always suspected her boutique was operating at a massive loss, a vanity project propped up by our father's deep pockets. But I had no idea he was funding it with stolen money. I pulled up the exact transaction timestamps and compared them against Alicia's business timeline. The data aligned with devastating clarity. Whenever Aura was facing a quarter-end deficit, whenever Alicia needed to purchase a new line of seasonal inventory to keep up appearances, a $60,000 wire transfer magically appeared in her commercial account. Over the past 2 years, Calvin and Vivian had siphoned over $2 million out of their orphaned granddaughter's trust fund and funneled it directly into their golden child's failing retail vanity project. Vivian's threat in this courthouse hallway suddenly took on a completely different, infinitely more sinister context. She had not threatened to freeze Zuri's money out of pure spite. She was threatening me because the money was already gone. They had not just stolen a child. They had committed massive felony-level embezzlement. They had breached their fiduciary duty in the most egregious criminal way possible. If any judge or state auditor looked at this ledger, Calvin and Vivian would be facing decades in federal prison. They were fighting so aggressively for custody, not because they loved Zuri, but because retaining guardianship was the only way to ensure the trust fund remained unaudited and under their absolute control. If I gained permanent custody, the court would mandate a full financial transfer of Zuri's assets to my care. I would instantly see the missing millions. The money wasn't just sitting in an index fund for Zuri's college. Hundreds of thousands of dollars were being siphoned out monthly and funneled directly into Alicia's failing high-end luxury boutique. They were not fighting a custody battle. They were staging a multi-million-dollar cover-up. I smiled, the cold blue light of the laptop reflecting in my eyes. I hit the print command, sending the entire undeniable paper trail to the secure laser printer in the corner of my office. Vivian and Calvin had built their entire empire on intimidation and the illusion of invulnerability. They thought they could break me by taking my niece and threatening my finances. But they had just handed me the exact weapon I needed to obliterate them entirely. I folded the freshly printed financial ledgers into a secure leather portfolio, killed the power to my encrypted laptop, and walked out of my office. The drive back to my uptown penthouse was a blur of calculating legal maneuvers and anticipating collateral damage. When I stepped through my front door, the heavy silence of the apartment was a welcome relief. My trauma nanny, a retired pediatric nurse named Sarah, met me in the foyer with a quiet nod, confirming Zuri had eaten a full meal and was currently watching a cartoon in the guest suite. I thanked her, walked into the kitchen, and dropped the portfolio onto the marble island. I poured myself a single glass of sparkling water and waited. 10 minutes later, the private elevator chimed. I did not check the security monitor. I had authorized this specific entry sequence hours ago. The polished steel doors parted and Chloe stepped directly into my foyer. If Vivian or Calvin had been standing in my apartment, their jaws would have hit the imported tile. My mother had spent 2 entire years aggressively marketing her late son's widow as a destitute, strung-out liability, a weeping, fragile tragedy who belonged in a gutter. The woman standing in my penthouse was none of those things. Chloe was sharply dressed in a tailored navy blazer, crisp dark trousers, and sensible polished loafers. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a sleek, professional knot. Her skin was clear, her blue eyes were sharp, and her posture radiated the quiet, formidable confidence of a woman who had fought her way out of hell and returned to claim what was hers. She carried a thick leather briefcase over one shoulder. She was exactly 2 years sober, completely clean, and currently holding down a mid-level executive position at a regional logistics firm. We did not exchange pleasantries. We did not do small talk. We embraced briefly a tight, rigid grip built on absolute shared purpose. "How is she?" Chloe asked immediately, her voice tight with restrained emotion. She dropped her briefcase onto the floor, her eyes darting down the hallway toward the closed guest bedroom doors. "She is safe," I promised, keeping my tone gentle but firm. "Sarah is with her. She is resting Chloe. She is finally warm, and she is entirely out of their reach." Chloe closed her eyes, letting out a long, ragged breath. Her shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch as the crushing anxiety temporarily left her body. 18 months, she whispered, opening her eyes to meet mine. 18 months of playing dead Kendra. "Do you have any idea how hard it was not to drive to their estate and kick down the door myself?" "I know," I said, leaning against the marble counter. "But if you had gone anywhere near that property, Calvin's lawyers would have eaten you alive. They were begging for you to make a scene. They wanted you to show up screaming so they could call the police, have you arrested, and permanently cement their narrative of you being an unstable threat. Instead, I submitted to weekly voluntary drug screenings," Chloe said, a hard, proud edge entering her voice. "I passed every single one. I completed intensive trauma therapy. I built a flawless corporate resume, rented a beautiful house in a top-tier school district, and lived like an absolute ghost. They think I vanished into thin air. They think they broke you," I corrected. "They think their money and their influence scared you into abandoning your daughter. They have absolutely no idea that we have been coordinating in the shadows for a year and a half, building an airtight, impenetrable legal strategy to take Zuri back permanently." I reached for the leather portfolio on the island and unclasped it. "Speaking of their money," I said, sliding the thick stack of printed ledgers across the cool marble toward her. The timeline just aggressively accelerated. Vivian cornered me at the courthouse this morning after the judge granted me temporary emergency guardianship. She threatened to bleed Zuri's $3 million trust fund dry in endless legal fees just to punish me. Chloe frowned, staring down at the complex financial spreadsheets. "Can they do that legally?" "They are the sole trustees," I explained, tapping the top page. "They have immense discretionary power." But Vivian made a fatal tactical error. She assumed the money was actually sitting in an index fund waiting to be weaponized. "I bypassed their security walls an hour ago. The money is not there, Chloe." Chloe's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. "What do you mean it is not there?" Jamal set that up specifically for Zuri's future. "I mean your former in-laws are running a massive, highly illegal embezzlement scheme," I stated, the thrill of the hunt bleeding into my voice. "They have been systematically siphoning hundreds of thousands of dollars out of their orphaned granddaughter's trust every single month. They bounce the cash through a maze of corporate shell accounts in Delaware and the Cayman Islands to hide the origin, and then they deposit it domestically." I flipped to the final page, highlighting the ultimate destination routing number. It all funnels directly into Aura Holdings, LLC, Alicia's high-end luxury boutique. "Your daughter's future is currently funding my sister's failing retail vanity project." Chloe stared at the highlighted text, absolute disgust, warring with predatory realization on her face. "They stole her money," she breathed. "They stole a child, and then they stole her inheritance to buy designer handbags." "It is felony-level financial fraud," I confirmed. "And it is our kill shot. We do not just have a custody case anymore, Chloe. We have the leverage to put Calvin, Vivian, and Alicia in federal prison. When we walk into the permanent custody hearing, we are bringing a financial guillotine. Chloe looked up, a fierce, protective fire burning in her eyes. We file tomorrow. I am not waiting another second to hold my daughter. I was nodding in agreement, reaching for my pocket to call my attorney David, when a sudden aggressive sound shattered the quiet of the penthouse. It was a sharp, authoritative pounding on my front door. I frowned, my forensic instincts immediately flaring. My building had round-the-clock security. No one made it up to the penthouse elevators without strict verified clearance from the concierge desk. I moved swiftly to the wall-mounted security monitor, tapping the screen to bring up the exterior hallway camera. 2 women stood outside my door. They were not police officers. They wore practical, muted business casual attire and carried thick clipboards. Around their necks hung state-issued identification lanyards. I zoomed in on the credentials. Child Protective Services. Vivian had not just threatened me in the courthouse. She had immediately weaponized the state, filing a malicious anonymous tip to trigger an unannounced random emergency inspection of my home. She was trying to prove I was an unfit guardian before the ink on the judge's temporary order was even dry. "Get in the guest suite and lock the door," I whispered to Chloe, never taking my eyes off the security monitor. "Do not make a single sound." Chloe grabbed her briefcase and vanished down the hallway without a word of protest. I took a slow, stabilizing breath, smoothed my blazer, and pulled open the heavy mahogany door. "Ms. Wilson." The lead agent asked, her eyes darting past me into the foyer. "We received a high-priority anonymous tip regarding the immediate safety and living conditions of a minor child, Zuri Wilson. We need to conduct an emergency welfare check." I stepped aside immediately, gesturing for them to enter. "Please," I said, keeping my voice cooperative and entirely calm. "My niece is right this way." I led the 2 agents through my penthouse. They meticulously inspected every corner of the open-concept living space. I opened my stainless steel refrigerator, revealing shelves perfectly stocked with fresh organic produce, prepared meals, and pediatric-approved juices. I showed them the child-proofing on the balcony doors and the state-of-the-art security system. Then I led them to the media room. Zuri was sitting comfortably on a plush velvet sofa, wrapped in a cashmere throw, happily watching an animated movie. Sarah, my vetted trauma nanny, was sitting nearby reading a book. Zuri looked up, her eyes bright, showing no signs of the terrified, abused captive my mother had described in her fabricated tip. The lead agent frowned, glancing down at her clipboard and then back at the pristine environment. The anonymous caller claimed the child was being held in a dangerous, unsanitary environment by an unstable adult, she noted, sounding almost embarrassed. "My parents are currently engaged in a hostile custody dispute," I explained, simply handing the agent David Vance's business card. "I suspect this tip was a tactical maneuver. My lawyer can provide you with the court's temporary guardianship order, signed by Judge Abernathy just hours ago." The agents left 10 minutes later, completely satisfied and visibly annoyed that their time had been wasted. Vivian's attempt to weaponize the state had spectacularly failed. But Calvin and Vivian never relied on a single line of attack. If they could not take Zuri through brute force or state intervention, they would cut off my ability to fight them. 3 hours later, my cell phone rang. It was Richard Sterling, the senior managing partner at my wealth management firm. His tone was tight-clipped and devoid of our usual professional warmth. "Kendra, we have a massive problem," he said. "The board just received a barrage of highly detailed anonymous ethics complaints against your license. They are alleging severe financial misconduct, unauthorized data access, and conflicts of interest. The state regulatory board has been copied on every single file." Calvin's handiwork was unmistakable. He was a man who understood leverage. He knew a forensic wealth manager without a license was like a soldier without armor. He wanted me suspended, investigated, and financially drained. "I have to place you on immediate administrative leave pending a full internal investigation." Richard continued, his voice heavy with regret. "You are locked out of the firm's servers. Do not speak to the press." "I understand, Richard," I replied smoothly. "I will cooperate fully with the board." I ended the call and tossed the phone onto my desk. A normal person would have panicked. A normal person would have immediately drafted a public statement, retained corporate counsel, and launched a fiery defense to protect a decade-long career. I did none of those things. I poured myself another glass of water and watched the Charlotte skyline darken into dusk. Let them feel powerful. Let Calvin believe his old boys network had successfully severed my professional lifeline. Let Vivian believe her manufactured chaos was driving me to the brink of a nervous breakdown. Sun Tzu wrote that all warfare is based on deception. When you are able to attack, you must seem unable. When you are active, you must appear inactive. The final piece of their trap snapped into place the following morning. David Vance called me with an update from opposing counsel. "Sterling just reached out," David said, sounding deeply suspicious. "The judge is highly irritated by the CPS stunt and the conflicting medical reports. Abernathy ordered a mandatory family mediation session before we move to a full evidentiary trial. Sterling says your parents are willing to negotiate a peaceful resolution if you come to the table." "They do not want a peaceful resolution," I replied, staring out at the ocean of glass and steel buildings. "They want to corner me in a closed room and force me to surrender custody in exchange for making the ethics complaints disappear. They think I am bleeding out." "Do you want me to file a motion to delay?" David asked. "No," I said, my voice dropping to a cool, calculated hum. "Accept the mediation. And David, I am walking into that room alone. You stay back." 2 days later, I pushed open the heavy double doors of the private mediation center in downtown Charlotte. I had carefully curated my appearance for this exact moment. I wore a wrinkled beige suit that I had deliberately pulled from the back of my closet. I skipped my usual flawless makeup routine, letting the natural exhausted shadows under my eyes show clearly. I let my shoulders slump, carrying the physical weight of a woman who had just lost her career, her reputation, and her upper hand. Calvin and Vivian were already seated across the long mahogany conference table. Richard Sterling sat beside them, his pen poised over a legal pad. The court-appointed mediator, a neutral, soft-spoken woman, sat at the head of the table. As I pulled out my chair and sat down heavily, I looked across the polished wood. Vivian was practically vibrating with triumphant energy. Her posture was immaculate. She adjusted her diamond bracelet and offered me a slow, predatory smirk. She looked at my tired face, my lack of legal counsel, and my defeated posture, and she saw exactly what she wanted to see. She thought she had finally broken me. The air in the mediation room is thick and heavily sterilized, smelling faintly of lemon polish and expensive leather. The mediator, a woman named Ms. Gallagher, sits at the head of the mahogany table, her hands folded neatly over a blank yellow legal pad. She opens her mouth to begin the standard introductory spiel about finding common ground and prioritizing the best interests of the child. Vivian does not even let her finish the first sentence. My mother holds up a single manicured hand, her heavy diamond bracelets clinking together. She turns her gaze entirely on me. She takes in my wrinkled beige suit, my unstyled hair, the dark, bruised-looking shadows under my eyes that I had carefully cultivated this morning. She sees a woman who has been stripped of her professional identity, cornered by a relentless legal machine, and driven to the absolute edge of a nervous breakdown. "We do not need to drag this out, Miss Gallagher," Vivian says, her voice dripping with the sickeningly sweet, syrupy tone she uses when hosting her church luncheons. "We are a family of faith. We are a family of forgiveness. We are here today because we love Kendra despite the deeply erratic and damaging choices she has made over the last 48 hours. Calvin nods solemnly beside her, adjusting his silk tie. Richard Sterling, his high-priced lawyer, sits with his pen poised, ready to draft the surrender documents. Vivian leans forward, resting her forearms on the table, adopting the posture of a benevolent, long-suffering matriarch. "We understand that you have been under immense pressure at work, Kendra. We know that the stress has clearly caused a severe lapse in your judgment. Kidnapping your niece, fabricating medical emergencies, making wild accusations in a public courthouse. It is a tragedy to see you unravel like this, but your father and I are willing to offer you grace. We are willing to extend a lifeline." I do not speak. I keep my eyes cast downward, my hands resting limply in my lap, playing the part of the broken, defeated daughter to absolute perfection. Here is what is going to happen. Vivian continues, her tone hardening just enough to reveal the steel beneath the velvet. You are going to sign a voluntary revocation of the temporary guardianship order right here, right now. You will return Zuri to our estate by 5 o'clock this evening. In exchange, your father will personally contact the board of directors at your firm. He will explain that the ethics complaints were filed during a period of intense, misunderstood family distress. He will ensure the investigation is dropped and your licenses remain intact. You get to keep your little career, Kendra. You get to keep your penthouse. You go back to your life, and we go back to ours. She pauses, letting the weight of the offer hang in the air. But there is one more condition. This Sunday you will stand before the church elder board. You will look them in the eye and publicly apologize for the disruption and the shameful lies you have told about this family. You will admit that you were overwhelmed and acting out of turn. Ms. Gallagher clears her throat, looking slightly uncomfortable with the punitive nature of the terms. Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, she interjects gently. While I understand there are high emotions here, we must primarily consider Zuri. The court also requires us to address the biological mother's rights. Chloe's whereabouts must be legally established before any permanent guardianship changes can be formalized. Vivian laughs. It is a sharp, jagged, entirely cruel sound that echoes off the wood-paneled walls. Chloe? Vivian scoffs, waving her hand as if swatting away an annoying insect. Please, Ms. Gallagher. Let us be realistic. That girl has not been seen in 18 months. She was a profound mistake, a tragedy my late son tried to fix, but ultimately could not. She is likely dead in a ditch somewhere or so strung out in some alleyway she does not even know her own name. Zuri has no mother, she only has us. We are the only stability that child has ever known. I slowly lift my head. I look directly at Vivian. I let the silence stretch thick and heavy until the smirk on her face begins to slightly falter. I look at Calvin, who is watching me with a smug, expectant gaze, waiting for me to break down in tears and sign away the only child my brother left behind. They have spent their entire lives controlling the narrative. They believe that power is derived from volume, from intimidation, from crushing anyone who dares to step out of line. They have no concept of the silent, invisible power of raw data. They do not know that while they were busy polishing their public image, I was meticulously analyzing the digital architecture of their actual lives. I do not offer a rebuttal. I do not defend Chloe's honor, nor do I scream about the horrific conditions Zuri was subjected to in that freezing, unheated garage room. I simply reach down to the leather portfolio resting by my feet. I unfasten the clasp. The click sounds like a hammer cocking in the quiet room. I slide my hand inside and bypass the thick stack of complete, devastating financial ledgers. I do not need the entire arsenal yet. I only need one bullet. I pull out a single crisp sheet of white printer paper. I place my hand flat on the paper and slide it smoothly across the polished mahogany table. It glides with a soft, distinct hiss, stopping perfectly in the center directly in front of Calvin. What is this? Calvin demands, his tone dripping with bored irritation. He does not reach for it immediately, treating the paper like a child's drawing he has been asked to inspect. I keep my eyes locked on his face. Read it, Dad. Calvin sighs heavily, putting on his gold-rimmed reading glasses. He picks up the paper. Richard Sterling leans over to glance at the document, his professional curiosity piqued. I watch Calvin's eyes scan the top line. I watch his gaze drop to the center of the page. I watch the precise, undeniable moment the illusion of his invulnerability shatters into a million jagged pieces. All the color instantly drains from his face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. His hands begin to tremble, the paper shaking so violently the crisp edges flutter. He stops breathing. He looks as though the floor has just vanished beneath his custom-made Italian leather shoes. It is a certified bank wire transfer confirmation printed directly from the central server. It details a highly specific, indisputable transaction. $250,000 extracted directly from the principal balance of Jamal's life insurance trust. The destination is clearly printed in bold black ink. A corporate shell company registered in Delaware, entirely owned and operated by Alicia, ultimately funneling directly into Aura Holdings LLC. Sterling snatches the paper from Calvin's shaking hands. The lawyer's eyes widen, his posture snapping rigidly upright. He realizes instantly that he is no longer sitting in a family mediation session. He is sitting at ground zero of a federal embezzlement investigation. Calvin drops his glasses onto the table. He looks up at me, the smug arrogance completely obliterated, replaced by sheer, unadulterated terror. He opens his mouth, closes it, and tries again. "Where did you get this?" Calvin demands, his voice cracking, a desperate hollow rasp that barely fills the room. I drop the posture of the defeated daughter. I sit up perfectly straight, my spine rigid, rolling my shoulders back. The exhaustion vanishes from my face, replaced by a cold, calculating, predatory calm. I lean forward, resting my elbows on the mahogany table, closing the distance between us. I'm just getting started. The mediation room dissolved into absolute chaos the second that wire transfer receipt hit the table. Richard Sterling did not even attempt to salvage the negotiation. He shoved the paper into his briefcase, grabbed Calvin by the elbow, and practically dragged him out of the room. Vivian followed, her previous matriarchal smugness entirely vaporized her face, a mask of panicked, undisguised terror. I walked out of the building, the crisp afternoon air filling my lungs, and called Chloe. The trap had been set, the bait taken, and the prey was currently bleeding out. By the time I reached my penthouse and booted up my encrypted laptop, the digital shockwaves were already registering across Calvin's financial architecture. Panic makes people stupid, and Calvin was currently terrified. I watched my forensic tracking software light up with a flurry of desperate, frantic activity. He was logging into offshore portals, frantically checking balances and trying to cover his tracks. But you cannot unring a bell, and you certainly cannot unwire $2 million of embezzled trust funds. When he realized the digital trail was permanently burned into the banking servers, he pivoted to his only remaining option: liquidation. I sat back and watched the real estate alerts trigger on my secondary monitor. Calvin had just listed their luxury vacation property in Aspen and a commercial warehouse in downtown Boston for immediate cash-only sale. He was pricing them 20% below market value. He was attempting to liquidate hard assets to rapidly inject cash back into Zuri's trust fund, hoping to magically correct the balance before a court-ordered audit could take place. He thought if the money was back in the account, the crime would simply disappear. It was a pathetic, fundamentally flawed strategy. Bank ledgers required date stamps. A sudden influx of $2 million the week of a custody dispute would look exactly like what it was: a desperate cover-up of a massive fiduciary breach. But Calvin and Vivian were not just playing defense. They were narcissists, and narcissists always lash out when cornered. The very next morning, my attorney, David Vance, forwarded me an urgent legal notice. Sterling had filed a highly aggressive motion demanding an immediate recorded sworn deposition. They were claiming that my presentation of the wire transfer was the result of unlawful corporate espionage and a psychotic break. They wanted to force the custody issue, hoping to bulldoze me under the harsh lights of a legal interrogation before I could formally submit the rest of the financial evidence to the district attorney. "They want to rattle you," David warned over the phone, his voice tight with concern. "Sterling is going to tear into your character. He wants to get you on the official record sounding hostile, unstable, and vindictive. We can file an injunction to delay this. Do not delay a single thing." I replied, my eyes scanning Calvin's frantic real estate listings. "Let them depose me. I want them in a room with a court reporter." 2 days later, we sat in the sterile, windowless conference room of Sterling's high-rise law firm. The court reporter sat at the head of the table, her fingers hovering over the stenography machine. The red light of the recording camera blinked steadily in the corner. Calvin and Vivian sat across from me, their posture rigid, their faces carefully arranged into masks of concerned, grieving grandparents. Sterling did not waste a second. He leaned across the table, his voice a sharp, accusatory whip. "Ms. Wilson, you have made incredibly damaging allegations regarding your parents' management of your niece's finances. You produced a document you claim proves financial mismanagement. Isn't it true that you unlawfully accessed private banking records in a desperate, vindictive attempt to secure custody of a child? You have no legal right to. I looked directly at the blinking red light of the camera. I kept my voice perfectly modulated, devoid of any anger or defensiveness. I am a certified forensic wealth manager. Mr. Sterling, I stated clearly for the record. 7 years ago, Calvin Wilson explicitly authorized me in writing to design and oversee the family's entire financial architecture. My access credentials were never revoked. I simply reviewed the accounts I built. In doing so, I noticed a severe discrepancy in the fiduciary duties owed to Zuri Wilson. Sterling sneered, waving a dismissive hand. You are grasping at straws to justify a gross invasion of privacy because you are unstable. You were recently suspended from your firm for ethical violations. Were you not? Your own professional board believes you are unfit to operate. How can this court trust the judgment of a disgraced accountant? I did not take the bait. I did not raise my voice to defend my career. Instead, I pivoted the entire weight of the interrogation directly onto the people sitting smugly across from me. My professional status is currently under a temporary routine review due to an anonymous complaint, I answered smoothly. But since we are establishing character and stability for the record, I think it is crucial to clarify the financial stability of the current guardians. After all, a child's welfare depends entirely on the integrity of her caretakers. I turned my gaze slowly, deliberately locking eyes with my father. Mr. Wilson, I said, my voice echoing loudly in the quiet room. As the sworn fiduciary of Zuri's trust, you are legally bound to protect her assets. For the official record, can you confirm that the trust currently holds the full unencumbered balance of $3 million as mandated by my late brother's will? Calvin's jaw tightened. Sterling immediately raised a hand. Objection. My clients are not the ones being deposed here. This is an interrogation of your actions, Ms. Wilson. But the question is highly relevant to my actions, I countered seamlessly, never breaking eye contact with Calvin. If the trust is fully funded, then my concerns are simply a misunderstanding. So I will ask again. Calvin Vivian, can you state under oath right now that you have not diverted a single cent of Zuri's money to fund Alicia's boutique, Aura Holdings, LLC? The silence in the room became suffocating. The court reporter's fingers paused over her keys. The red recording light blinked relentlessly. Vivian's perfectly powdered face flushed a dark, angry red. We are wealthy, upstanding members of this community, she snapped, unable to tolerate the challenge to her pride. We do not need to steal money. We have endless resources. We provide everything that child needs. We manage our finances flawlessly. So you are stating on the record under oath that your financial standing is immaculate, I pressed, leaning forward just an inch. You are confirming that you are not currently experiencing any sudden catastrophic liquidity issues? Absolutely not. Calvin barked, his ego overriding his legal survival instincts. We are completely financially solvent. I smiled. It was a cold, fatal expression. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the freshly printed real estate listings for the Aspen property and the Boston warehouse, complete with the time-stamped cash-only fire sale price reductions. Then perhaps you can explain to the court, I said, sliding the documents across the table, why you are desperately attempting to liquidate your primary luxury assets at a 20% loss as of yesterday morning. The court reporter resumed typing. Sterling's face drained of color. The trap had just snapped shut. Sterling stares at the wire transfer receipt lying between us. The silence stretches thick and suffocating before his survival instincts finally kick in. He shoves the paper back across the table toward me, his face flushed with a mixture of outrage and genuine alarm. This is an unverified, highly irregular document, Sterling barks, looking directly at the court reporter. I am moving to strike this from the record. Ms. Wilson is clearly fabricating financial records to distract from her own erratic behavior. I do not touch the paper. I leave it resting perfectly in the center of the mahogany table, a glaring monument to their incoming destruction. You can move to strike whatever you want, Richard. I say, my voice perfectly level. But the Federal Bureau of Investigation does not strike certified wire transfer routing numbers. Calvin shifts violently in his chair. He shoots a desperate, panicked look at his lawyer. Sterling understands that if Calvin refuses to answer the question, he effectively pleads the Fifth Amendment in a civil deposition, which will be used to immediately strip him of his fiduciary status. Sterling has to force Calvin to deny it on the record, hoping my document is just a bluff. Mr. Wilson, Sterling says, his voice tight and overly loud, attempting to project confidence. Let us clear this up for the record right now. As the designated trustee for your granddaughter's estate, can you confirm the status of the funds? Calvin straightens his spine. He tugs at the lapels of his custom suit, falling back on the arrogant, untouchable persona he has worn his entire life. He genuinely believes that because he is Calvin Wilson, the rules of reality will simply bend to his word. That document is a complete fabrication, Calvin states, his voice booming with forced authority. I am deeply saddened that my daughter has resorted to forging bank records. As the sole fiduciary of Jamal's trust, I take my responsibilities incredibly seriously. I swear under oath and before this court reporter that every single penny of Jamal's trust remains completely untouched, secure, and fully invested for Zuri's future. I watch him. I do not blink. I do not interrupt. I let the court reporter's fingers fly across the keys, permanently etching his felony perjury into the official state transcript. Sterling lets out a visible breath of relief, foolishly believing they have neutralized the threat. He immediately pivots to Vivian, eager to move the deposition back to their strongest emotional battleground, the custody of Zuri. Mrs. Wilson, Sterling says, softening his tone to address my mother. Let us address Kendra's ongoing delusions regarding Zuri's biological mother. Can you please state for the record the exact nature of Chloe's involvement in your granddaughter's life? Vivian is a masterclass in performative grief. She reaches into her designer handbag and produces a lace-trimmed handkerchief. She dabs at the corners of her dry eyes, her lower lip trembling just enough to convey heartbreak without sacrificing her flawless makeup. It is a tragedy, Vivian begins, her voice cracking with manufactured sorrow. A devastating tragedy that we have shielded Zuri from for her own protection. Chloe was a profoundly sick girl. We tried everything to help her after Jamal passed, but she chose her addictions over her own flesh and blood. Vivian looks directly into the recording camera, leaning into the lens as if speaking to the judge himself. I swear under oath, Vivian continues, her voice ringing with absolute chilling conviction. We have not seen or heard from Chloe in over 2 years. She aggressively abandoned that precious little girl. We hired private investigators. We reached out to her former associates. She vanished into the streets. She is completely unreachable and entirely unfit. We are the only family Zuri has left. Sterling nods sympathetically. Thank you, Mrs. Wilson. I know how painful it is to recount that trauma. He turns his gaze back to me, the smug, victorious smirk returning to his face. Well, Ms. Wilson, Sterling says, closing his legal pad with a sharp snap. Your parents have just testified under penalty of perjury that your financial allegations are baseless and your claims regarding the biological mother are entirely fabricated. We are done here. I will be filing a motion for immediate sanctions against you by the end of the day. Are you finished? I ask calmly. Sterling glares at me. We are adjourned. I turn my head and look directly at the court reporter. Did you capture their statements exactly as spoken? The reporter nods, her face pale. She can feel the atmospheric pressure in the room shifting. Good, I say. I reach down into the large leather tote bag resting by my feet. I do not pull out a single sheet of paper this time. I lift a massive 4-inch thick black binder. It is heavy, bound tightly and meticulously tabbed with brightly colored legal dividers. I raise the binder high enough for the recording camera to capture its sheer size. Then I drop it onto the center of the mahogany table. The heavy thud echoes like a gunshot. Vivian jumps, clutching her chest. Calvin stares at the black binder as if it were an active explosive device. What is this? Sterling demands, his voice losing its confident edge. This, I reply, resting my hands flat on top of the binder, is a comprehensive digital extraction. As you know, my sister Alicia operates a luxury boutique named Aura Holdings. Since Alicia uses her corporate phone to conduct business across state lines, her communications are subject to immediate financial discovery during an embezzlement probe. I flip open the thick cover. The pages are densely packed with text messages, dates, and timestamps. I legally subpoenaed the complete unredacted group chat history between Vivian, Calvin, and Alicia. I state my voice ringing with absolute lethal clarity. I turn to the first tab, sliding the open binder toward Sterling. Page 42, I read aloud. A message from Vivian to Alicia dated 6 months ago. Quote, "Do not worry about the lease payment for the boutique. Your father is transferring another $50,000 from Jamal's account tomorrow. Make sure you use the Delaware routing number so Kendra does not see it." End quote. Calvin lets out a choked, suffocating gasp. He grabs the edge of the table, his knuckles turning bone white. Vivian's mouth opens, but no sound comes out. I turn to the second tab, page 112. I continue relentlessly. A message from Calvin to Vivian dated last Tuesday. Quote, "Chloe's lawyer sent another letter demanding visitation. I told security to shred it and deny she was ever at the gate. If that junkie gets near Zuri, we lose access to the trust. Keep ignoring her calls." End quote. I close the binder and fold my hands together. You both just swore under penalty of perjury that the trust was untouched and Chloe was unreachable. I say, my voice a quiet, freezing whisper that fills the entire room. You just committed 2 state felonies on a recorded legal transcript. I look at Sterling, who is staring at the text messages with sheer, unadulterated horror. I highly recommend you advise your clients to hire criminal defense attorneys, Mr. Sterling, because family court is the least of their problems now. The heavy rustle of paper sounds like a guillotine dropping. The silence in the conference room is absolute, broken only by the frantic, panicked breathing of my parents. Richard Sterling does not move. His eyes are glued to the open binder, staring at the printed text messages as if they are written in poison. I do not give them a single second to recover. I turn to the next heavily tabbed section. I look directly at the court reporter, ensuring she is capturing every single syllable. Tab 4, I state clearly. Page 147 of the subpoenaed records. A direct message from Vivian Wilson to Alicia Wilson sent 3 months ago at exactly 2:14 in the afternoon. Vivian shifts violently in her chair. "Kendra, stop this right now. You are taking things out of context." I ignore her entirely and begin reading. Quote, "I cannot deal with this half-breed burden today. She is crying for her mother again. Tell the nanny to lock her in the media room and turn the volume up. I have my charity luncheon and I refuse to have a headache." End quote. The court reporter gasps softly, her hands faltering over the keys for a fraction of a second before her professional training kicks back in. Vivian's face turns a mottled, horrifying shade of crimson. Her pristine, charitable matriarch persona shatters completely. She looks wildly at Sterling. "My phone was hacked. That is fabricated. I am a Christian woman. I would never use that kind of language to describe my own flesh and blood. These records were pulled directly from the telecom provider via a federal subpoena." I reply, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register. "They are forensically certified. There is no hacking, Vivian. There is only the truth you thought you could hide behind closed doors." I do not let her breathe. I flip immediately to the next tab. Tab 7, I announce. Page 212. A group text between Calvin, Vivian, and Alicia. Dated 4 weeks ago, right after I filed my initial motion for guardianship. Calvin practically lunges across the table, his hand reaching for the binder. "That is protected family communication. You have no right." Sterling grabs Calvin by the forearm, yanking him back into his seat with shocking force. "Shut your mouth," Calvin, Sterling hisses, his professional veneer entirely gone. "Do not say another word on this record." But I am already reading. Quote, "Alicia is panicking about the boutique rent. Vivian replies, 'We will handle it.' Calvin replies, 'Just keep the kid quiet so we can keep pulling from her paycheck. If Kendra gets custody, the trust goes with her and we lose the slush fund." End quote. The words hang in the sterilized air of the conference room. Just keep the kid quiet so we can keep pulling from her paycheck. My brother's tragic death, the profound loss of a father reduced to nothing more than a steady revenue stream to fund their lavish, empty lifestyles. They had monetized Zuri's grief, Sterling pushes his chair back from the table so violently that it tips over, crashing onto the carpeted floor. He is deathly pale, his skin the color of old parchment. He is a high-priced corporate lawyer who deals in aggressive negotiations and custody disputes. He does not deal in wire fraud, embezzlement, and active perjury. "This deposition is over, Sterling," barks, his voice shaking with a mixture of rage and terror. He begins throwing his legal pads and pens into his leather briefcase with frantic, uncoordinated movements. "We are off the record." The court reporter looks up confused. "Sir, the camera is still rolling." "Turn it off," Sterling shouts, pointing a shaking finger at the red light. "Turn it off right now. I am formally withdrawing as counsel for Calvin and Vivian Wilson, effective immediately." Calvin leaps to his feet, his face twisted in panic. "Richard, you cannot do this. We pay you a retainer. You work for us. You are going to fix this." "I cannot fix active perjury," Calvin Sterling snarls, zipping his briefcase shut. "You sat in my office and swore to me that your finances were immaculate. You just lied under oath on a recorded state transcript. I am not losing my license to practice law because you decided to rob a child's trust fund. Find yourselves a federal criminal defense attorney. You are going to need one." Sterling storms out of the room, the heavy glass door slamming shut behind him. The power dynamic in the room has completely inverted. Calvin and Vivian are no longer the untouchable wealthy elite. They are cornered criminals stripped of their legal protection, staring down the barrel of federal charges. And then from the far corner of the room, a low, panicked whimpering begins. Alicia had insisted on attending the deposition, believing she was going to watch my final defeat. She sits on the leather guest sofa, her phone clutched in her hands, her eyes wide and terrified. She has finally connected the dots. She realizes that the wire transfer was sent to her corporate entity. She realizes that she is the registered owner of the LLC that received the stolen funds. Calvin turns to her, his survival instincts kicking in. He immediately looks for a scapegoat. "Alicia," Calvin says, his voice desperate, "you are going to have to take the fall for the boutique transfer. You will tell the authorities it was a business loan you initiated without our knowledge. We will pay for your lawyer. We will take care of you." Alicia stares at him, her mouth opening and closing in sheer horror. She looks at the binder on the table, then at our mother, who is actively refusing to make eye contact with her. They are doing what they have always done. They are sacrificing their young to save themselves. Alicia's breathing turns ragged. Her hands grip the edge of the sofa as she slowly stands up. The reality of federal prison flashes before her eyes. The designer bags and luxury vacations vanish, replaced by the terrifying realization that her parents are actively framing her for a crime they orchestrated. "No," Alicia gasps, shaking her head violently. "No, I am not doing this. I am not going to jail for you." Calvin takes a step toward her, raising his hand in a harsh, demanding gesture. "Alicia, keep your voice down. You will do exactly as I say." Alicia cracks. The golden child, the compliant daughter, completely shatters under the pressure. "You cannot pin this on me!" Alicia screams, her voice piercing and hysterical, echoing off the walls. She points a shaking finger directly at Calvin's chest. "You cannot put this on me. I know what you did." Calvin freezes, his eyes bulging. "Shut up, Alicia." "Dad forged Jamal's signature on the trustee amendment." Alicia shrieks, completely hysterical now. She turns to me, her eyes wild, desperate to save herself by burning him to the ground. "He forged the documents the week before Jamal died. The money was never supposed to go to him. The money was supposed to go to Chloe." The room drops into dead silence. The echo of Alicia's hysterical confession in that deposition room was the final devastating crack in my parents' impenetrable armor. Her terrified screams triggered a rapid cascade of emergency legal filings, effectively stripping Richard Sterling of his ability to defend them and fast-tracking our case to the top of the state superior court docket. 3 weeks later, we walked into the grand oak-paneled courtroom for the final consolidated custody and financial oversight hearing. The atmosphere in the room was entirely suffocating. Vivian and Calvin had spent the last 21 days treating this trial like a high-society social event, mobilizing their vast network of enablers. The gallery was packed to absolute capacity. The heavy wooden pews groaned under the weight of Vivian's elite prayer circle, Calvin's golf partners, the country club board of directors, and the senior church elders. They sat in unified silent solidarity, dressed in their finest tailored suits and conservative dresses, ready to witness the swift exoneration of their favorite local philanthropists. They looked at me with open, undisguised disdain, viewing me as a rebellious, ungrateful daughter, attempting to tear down a pillar of their community. Vivian was called to the stand first. She had carefully abandoned her usual displays of aggressive wealth. She wore a modest, pale beige cardigan over a simple, high-necked blouse. She walked to the witness box with a slow, deliberate shuffle, her shoulders hunched forward to project an image of profound, fragile aging. When she took the oath, her voice was a masterclass in performative grief. She wept softly into a monogrammed tissue, her chest heaving with manufactured sorrow. She spoke in a trembling, breathy whisper about the unimaginable agony of losing her beloved son Jamal. She painted a vivid, completely fabricated picture of a family doing their absolute best in an impossible, tragic situation. She claimed they were simply trying to hold their fragmented world together to provide a loving, secure home for a little girl who had been abandoned by the rest of the world. She cast herself as the ultimate martyr, sacrificing her golden years to step into the breach. Calvin followed her to the stand. He did not weep. He opted for the role of the stoic, deeply wounded patriarch. He leaned forward into the microphone, his hands clasped together, and attempted to use his formidable community status to sway the room. He spoke directly to Judge Eris, a notoriously strict magistrate with a reputation for piercing through corporate spin. Calvin cited his 30 years of flawless community service. He listed the hospital wings his company had funded and the charity galas he had chaired. When pressed on the financial discrepancies, he waved his hand dismissively. He claimed the missing funds were nothing more than complex administrative errors, sloppy bookkeeping born out of the blinding fog of immense grief. He stated that taking over a complex trust while simultaneously acting as primary caregivers for a traumatized child had simply overwhelmed their accountants. He assured the court with his deepest, most practiced sincerity that any misappropriation was a temporary, desperate oversight that would be rectified immediately. Judge Eris listened in silence. His face was a mask of rigid judicial neutrality, but the slight, dangerous narrowing of his eyes suggested he was not entirely buying the performance. The room, however, felt heavy with the expectation that Calvin's social status would inevitably protect him. That is how their world had always operated. Then my attorney called me to the stand. I did not wear a pale cardigan. I wore a sharply tailored dark navy suit. I did not bring a tissue to wipe away tears, and I did not ask for the court's sympathy. I brought a secure encrypted flash drive. I did not bring emotion. I brought the math. A massive digital projector screen was lowered from the ceiling at the front of the courtroom. The bailiff dimmed the overhead lights. I connected my drive to the court's interface and brought up the forensic accounting timeline I had spent months meticulously building in the shadows. For the next 2 hours, I systematically dismantled my parents' entire financial existence. I did not make wild accusations or raise my voice. I simply let the undeniable, cold, hard numbers tell the story. I projected the primary ledger of Jamal's life insurance trust onto the massive screen, blowing up the numbers so every single church elder in the back row could read them clearly. Then I overlaid the time-stamped withdrawals with the exact corresponding dates of Calvin and Vivian's luxury purchases. I highlighted a specific $75,000 withdrawal made on a Tuesday, tracking it directly penny for penny to a wire transfer, sent on a Wednesday to a luxury European car dealership for Vivian's brand-new Range Rover. I tracked a relentless series of $10,000 microtransfers, deliberately kept just under the federal reporting limit, routing directly into the operating account of Alicia's failing high-end boutique. I displayed the quarterly country club dues, the Aspen vacation rentals, the private catering bills for Vivian's charity luncheons, and the payments for Calvin's custom tailoring. I projected a color-coded graph that showed the trust account draining at a terrifying speed, while their personal asset columns spiked in direct, perfect correlation. Every single cent was mapped with aggressive, undeniable precision. I proved flawlessly and without a margin of error that over the span of 18 months, Calvin and Vivian Wilson had stolen exactly $1,240,000 from their deceased son's daughter. The gallery was dead silent. The air had been entirely sucked out of the room. The church elders sitting in the front pews were staring at the glowing screen in open-mouthed, unblinking horror. The pristine illusion of the benevolent philanthropists was burning to ash right in front of them. Vivian was gripping the edge of the defendant's table, her knuckles white, her face buried in her hands. Calvin was staring straight ahead, his jaw locked in a rictus of sheer panic. Judge Aris leaned heavily over his bench, his face tight with barely suppressed rage. He looked past my attorney and locked eyes directly with Vivian. "Mrs. Wilson," Judge Aris said, his voice slicing through the terrifying quiet of the room like a blade. "You stated under oath earlier today that your grandchild's mother aggressively abandoned her. Given the staggering, unprecedented level of financial fraud displayed here today, I'm going to ask you one more time, where is the biological mother of this child?" Vivian stood up slowly. Her panic instantly manifested as desperate, cornered defiance. She clung to her original lie because it was the only piece of armor she had left. "She is an unfit, drug-addicted lost cause, Your Honor." Vivian stated, her voice shrill and echoing wildly in the large room. "She ran away. She does not care about Zuri. We are the only family that child has. She is a danger to herself and society." The heavy brass-studded wooden doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a loud, resounding crash. Every single head in the packed room turned. Chloe walked down the center aisle. She did not look like a lost cause. Chloe wore a simple, immaculately pressed black dress. Her hair was pulled back neatly into a professional bun. Her posture was perfectly straight, her expression composed, and her eyes burned with a steady, unbreakable fire. She walked past the whispering church elders, past Calvin's gaping, terrified face, and past Vivian, who looked as though the floor had just opened up to swallow her whole. My attorney immediately called Chloe to the stand. She swore the oath in a clear, unwavering voice that commanded total silence in the room. She did not yell. She did not cry. She was clean, articulate, and completely unbroken by the years of psychological and legal warfare my parents had waged against her. Over the next hour, Chloe systematically destroyed the final crumbling pillars of Vivian and Calvin's defense. She presented certified court-admissible medical records, documenting 2 full years of consecutive clean, bi-weekly drug tests. She handed over pristine employment records, proving she had been working full-time as a regional logistics manager, earning a promotion just 3 months prior. She provided character references from her sponsors, her employers, and her landlord. Then she produced the killing blow. Chloe reached into her briefcase and handed the bailiff a sealed manila envelope to present to the judge. Inside was the original unforged trust document Jamal had executed safely with an independent lawyer just weeks before his death. It clearly named Chloe as the sole primary trustee in the event of his passing, with strict instructions that Calvin and Vivian were to have zero financial access to Zuri's inheritance. "My parents told me Jamal cut me out," Chloe testified, turning her head to look directly at the judge. "They cornered me at the hospital the night he died. They told me if I ever tried to see Zuri, they would use their vast wealth and political influence to have me permanently arrested for trespassing and drug possession. They told me no judge in this state would ever believe a recovering addict over the mighty Calvin Wilson. They used my past against me to steal my daughter's future." Judge Aris carefully reviewed the original trust documents. He compared the signatures to the forged amendments Calvin had submitted to the probate court. He looked back up at the bank statements still projected on the massive screen. Finally, he picked up the printed copies of the vile text messages I had submitted into evidence. He cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses, and read the words aloud into the official court record. "I cannot deal with this half-breed burden today. Tell the nanny to lock her in the media room. Just keep the kid quiet so we can keep pulling from her paycheck." The trial was over. The verdict was already permanently etched into the heavy, suffocating silence of the room. The gallery members were actively looking away from my parents, disgusted by the monsters sitting in their midst. Calvin scrambled to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. His hands were shaking violently. "Your Honor, please," Calvin begged, his voice cracking, entirely stripped of its usual booming authority. "We are pillars of this community. We have donated millions to local charities. We built the pediatric wing at the hospital. We made a mistake, a terrible grief-stricken lapse in judgment, but we do not deserve to be treated like common criminals. We are the Wilsons. We can make full financial restitution by the end of the week." Judge Aris looked down at him with absolute freezing contempt. "You are not pillars of the community, Mr. Wilson," the judge said, his voice echoing loudly, dripping with disgust. "You are predators. You are deeply corrupt individuals who weaponize the legal system to rob an orphaned child and terrorize a grieving mother in order to fund your own vanity. You have disgraced yourselves, your community, and this court." The judge picked up his heavy wooden gavel. "I am granting full, immediate, and permanent custody of Zuri Wilson to her biological mother, Chloe," Judge Aris announced, his voice ringing like thunder. "Furthermore, based on the incontrovertible, overwhelming evidence of grand theft, forgery, and perjury presented in this court today, I am officially referring Calvin and Vivian Wilson to the district attorney for immediate federal criminal prosecution. Bail is denied due to extreme flight risk given your offshore assets." The heavy wooden gavel slammed down onto the sounding block. The crack echoed through the courtroom like a rifle shot. Judge Aris looked directly past my parents to the two armed, uniformed bailiffs standing by the wall. "Take them into custody." The metallic click of handcuffs is a remarkably distinct sound. In a room that had fallen into absolute breathless silence, the ratcheting of the steel restraints echoing off the oak-paneled walls sounded like a vault door slamming permanently shut. Two armed bailiffs moved with swift, practiced efficiency. The first grabbed Calvin by the shoulder, twisting his arms behind his back. Calvin fought the grip for exactly 1 second, his ingrained arrogance telling him he could simply shrug off an officer of the law. He opened his mouth to bark an order to demand respect, to remind the room that he was Calvin Wilson. But the words died in his throat. He looked out into the gallery. He looked at the senior church elders, his golf partners, the country club board of directors. The men who had shaken his hand and eaten his catered dinners were completely rigid. They were not rushing to his defense. They were physically turning their bodies away from him, their faces masks of pure disgust. In that fraction of a second, Calvin realized his wealth and status had officially evaporated. He went entirely limp, allowing the bailiff to secure the cuffs. Vivian chose a different route. True to her nature, she attempted a final, desperate performance. As the second bailiff reached for her wrist, she let out a high, piercing wail and allowed her knees to buckle, attempting to dramatically faint onto the courtroom floor. She expected the room to gasp. She expected someone to rush forward to catch the frail, grieving grandmother. No one moved. The bailiff simply caught her by the elbow, hoisted her roughly back to her feet, and snapped the cuffs onto her wrists. Her designer cardigan snagged on the metal links. The indignity of the moment was absolute. As they were marched down the center aisle of the courtroom, the social annihilation was instantaneous and brutal. A senior elder from their church, a man who had dined at their estate just 3 nights prior, stood up from his pew. He looked Calvin dead in the eye and stated in a voice loud enough for the entire gallery to hear that Calvin was permanently stripped of his leadership title, and that neither of them would ever be welcomed back onto holy ground. Vivian sobbed loudly, pleading with her friends as she was dragged past them, but her former social circle simply stared right through her, treating her like a ghost. The domino effect of their arrest triggered a devastating financial avalanche. By the time Calvin and Vivian were processed into the county holding facility, stripped of their tailored suits and dressed in standard-issue orange jumpsuits, the federal authorities were already dismantling their empire. The state seized their passports, froze every single one of their domestic and offshore accounts, and placed an immediate lien on their sprawling estate. But the most spectacular downfall belonged to Alicia. 2 days after the trial, a fleet of black government SUVs pulled up onto the manicured sidewalk directly in front of Aura Holdings, LLC. Alicia was inside screaming at her staff about plunging sales, completely unaware that the protective bubble her parents had built around her had already popped. Federal IRS agents flooded through the glass double doors. They did not ask for permission. They presented a federal seizure warrant for the entire premises. Because Alicia's business had been directly funded by money embezzled from a minor's trust, every single asset inside that boutique was legally classified as stolen property. I stood across the street holding a cup of coffee, watching the scene unfold. I watched as federal agents systematically boxed up tens of thousands of dollars worth of imported silk garments, designer handbags, and custom jewelry. I watched them carry the boxes out to a waiting transport truck. Alicia stood on the sidewalk, weeping hysterically, begging the agents to stop screaming that it was her inventory. The lead agent simply handed her a notice of audit and locked the glass doors of the boutique, slapping a bright orange federal seizure notice across the front handle. Alicia was left standing on the pavement with nothing but the clothes on her back, completely bankrupt. The liquidation of Calvin and Vivian's assets happened with breathtaking speed. The Aspen property and the commercial warehouse they had frantically tried to sell were seized, auctioned, and the proceeds were routed directly back into the legal system. A week later, Chloe and I stood in Judge Eris's private chambers for the final restorative hearing. The atmosphere was completely different from the battlefield of the trial. The heavy, oppressive tension had lifted. Judge Eris signed the final decree with a sharp, decisive stroke of his pen. He formally and permanently granted Chloe full legal and physical custody of Zuri. He then handed over the certified banking documents. Through the aggressive seizure and liquidation of my parents' assets, the missing $1,240,000 had been fully recovered. Jamal's trust was completely restored down to the final cent. Judge Eris looked up at Chloe, a rare, genuine smile crossing his face. "Ms. Davis," he said warmly, "the trust is whole, and you are the sole legal guardian of your daughter. As the primary trustee designated by the late Jamal Wilson, you have the right to appoint a financial overseer of your choosing. Have you made a decision?" Chloe turned and looked at me. Her eyes were bright, clear, and filled with an immense, profound gratitude. "Yes, Your Honor," Chloe said confidently. "I explicitly request that Kendra Wilson be permanently appointed as the legal financial overseer of Zuri's trust. There is no one on earth I trust more to protect my daughter's future." I signed the documents without hesitation. The legal loop was closed. The money was safe. The child was safe. The war was officially over. 3 weeks later, the Charlotte afternoon sun cast a warm golden glow over the sprawling green expanse of Freedom Park. The air smelled of fresh-cut grass and blooming magnolia trees. It was a perfect, flawless Saturday. I sat on a large quilted picnic blanket spread out beneath the shade of a massive oak tree. Chloe sat beside me, unpacking a woven wicker basket filled with fresh fruit sandwiches and sparkling water. She looked entirely transformed. The exhausted, terrified woman who had been hunted by my parents was gone. In her place was a vibrant, peaceful, deeply happy mother. She wore a bright yellow sundress, her hair falling in loose, natural curls around her shoulders, laughing freely as she arranged the plates. A few yards away, Zuri was sprinting across the grass, chasing a brightly colored butterfly kite. Her laughter echoed through the park, a bright musical sound that completely erased the memory of the silent, terrified child locked in a freezing garage. She was thriving. Her cheeks were full, her eyes were bright, and she was surrounded by absolute, unconditional love. I leaned back on my hands, watching them, feeling a deep, quiet sense of contentment settle into my bones. For my entire life, I had been taught that power meant control. I had been raised in a house where love was a transaction, where family was a weapon, and where success was measured by how thoroughly you could dominate the people around you. Looking at Chloe and Zuri, I realized that true power was simply the ability to build a life where you no longer had to fight to survive. My phone buzzed against the picnic blanket, vibrating against my leg. I picked it up and glanced at the screen. It was an automated notification from the county correctional facility. An inmate was attempting to leave a voicemail. I tapped the screen and lifted the phone to my ear. The audio was staticky, echoing against the hard concrete walls of the jail. Then Vivian's voice filtered through the speaker. Kendra, Vivian sobbed. Her voice was raspy, stripped of all its former syrupy elegance. It was the raw, pathetic sound of a woman who had finally realized she could not manipulate her way out of a federal cage. Kendra, please, you have to answer the phone. You have to talk to the judge. They are denying our bail. They are treating us like animals in here. You have the money, Kendra. You control the trust now. You can post the bond. She paused, taking a ragged, desperate breath. She reached for the only weapon she thought she had left. Please, Kendra, Vivian begged, her voice cracking. We are your parents. We are blood. Family sticks together. You cannot just abandon us. I lowered the phone from my ear. I looked out across the park. Zuri had caught the string of her kite and was running back toward the blanket, her face split into a massive, joyful grin. Chloe opened her arms, catching her daughter in a tight, spinning hug, pressing a kiss to the top of Zuri's head. I looked back down at the screen. I did not feel a single drop of anger. I did not feel a surge of vindictive triumph. I did not want to yell or scream or gloat. I felt absolutely nothing for the woman crying on the other end of the line. The emotional tether had been completely surgically severed. I calmly dragged my thumb across the screen and hit delete. I pressed the side button, powering the device down completely, tossing the darkened phone into my tote bag. Auntie Kendra, Zuri yelled, tumbling onto the blanket and reaching eagerly toward the picnic basket. I am thirsty. I smiled, picking up a cold apple juice box. I popped the straw through the foil seal and handed it to her. She took it with a happy little hum, leaning back against her mother's side as they watched a group of ducks waddle past the nearby pond. I settled back onto the blanket, turning my face up to catch the warmth of the Charlotte sun. The cycle of toxicity was permanently broken. The empire of lies was reduced to dust. Justice was not just sweet, it was incredibly, profoundly peaceful. The most profound takeaway from this journey is that your worth is never defined by those who are committed to misunderstanding you. When toxic family members try to tear you down or use you as a scapegoat, true power lies in walking away and building your own sanctuary. You do not need to fight for a seat at a table where you are not respected. You can simply build your own. Ultimate victory isn't about destroying them, but about becoming so authentically successful and at peace that their cruelty can no longer reach you. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic relatives to discover your true worth? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to hit subscribe for more empowering journeys of healing and self-discovery.